The others raised no objections to Devil Concord's suggestion to move the discussion elsewhere, and the group headed towards Spirit Turtle Island. Hanli asked Master Sunreach for a sealed room to spend the night meditating as they waited for the other two to retrieve the formation plate from the spell formation masters. Then, on the morning of the next day, Hanli received a sound transmission talisman from Master Sunreach and promptly appeared at the main hall. Hanli walked in with a raised brow, noticing that the three great cultivators were already seated and talking to one another. When Wei Wuya saw Hanli arrive, he called out to him and summoned a faint red jade slip on the table with a flip of his hand. "Fellow Daoist Han, please take a seat. This is the location that you must place the formation plate according to our research of the sealing formation." "Oh. Let me take a look." With a wave, the jade slip shot into his hand and then he took a seat before immersing his spiritual sense into it. A short moment later, Hanli's face stirred and he withdrew his spiritual sense from the jade slip, wearing a gloomy expression on his face. Hanli tossed the jade slip back on the table and raised his head, coldly saying, "Fellow Taoists, do you plan on having me go on a one-way journey to place the formation plate so deep into the abyss?" Devil Concord calmly replied, "How can fellow Daoist Han say that? Although the location for the formation plate is a bit deep, with the divine Devil Bane lightning protecting you, it shouldn't pose a problem." "Is that so?" Hanli glanced at Devil Concord and said with an angry tone, "Does Brother Concord believe my reserves of divine Devil Bane lightning are infinite? Or do you simply wish for me to not return after I place down the formation plate? You mean to say that you don't have enough divine Devil Bane lightning to last the trip back?" Wei Wuya asked with a frown. "From what I remember, fellow Daoist Han controlled quite a large quantity of lightning during his battle with the Elder Devil. It shouldn't pose much of a problem. Could it be that you didn't delve too far deep into the devilish qi?" Hanli asked with an odd expression. Wei Wuya yelped. "Fellow Daoist Han means to say." Devil Concord's eyes flickered but he remained silent. As for Master Sunreach, he lowered his head in thought. Hanli knitted his fingers together and held them at his chest before he explained with an indifferent tone, "At a certain depth it is clear to see that the devilish nature of the qi becomes even stronger and it exhausts the divine Devil Bane lightning at a greater speed. I've reached this conclusion after delving a kilometer deep into the abyss. Although I do possess a bit of divine Devil Bane lightning, I will not be able to delve 10 kilometers deep into the devilish qi and make it back." Wei Wuya tensely frowned and turned to Master Sunreach, asking, "So it was like that? Brother Sunreach, you delved the deepest into the devilish qi out of the three of us. Is this true?" "It's true," Master Sunreach sighed and nodded in agreement. "When I delved deeper into the devilish qi using my secret techniques, I felt my magic power drain at a faster rate. I originally believed that Hanli wouldn't notice and was thinking about warning him." When Devil Concord heard this, his expression changed and he said, "In that case, our original plan to have a cultivator enter the devilish qi depths with devil-warding treasures would fail. Although they would be safe at the beginning, there is danger of becoming corrupted once they delve too deep." "That's right," Master Sunreach said with a wry smile, "that's why I wasn't very interested in that plan. But since fellow Daoist Han was still missing at the time, I didn't raise any objections as there were no other alternatives." Hanli observed their tone of voice and expressions with indifference, but he grew somewhat gloomy. He was unable to tell whether the three truly knew of it or if they decided to keep the matter hidden. Regardless, he wouldn't easily agree to them. Then, the room was filled with silence. It was clear that it would be a death sentence to have someone place a formation plate this deep in the depths of the devilish qi. Telling Hanli to do it for a virtuous cause would be an even less likely matter. Although the four present realized that half the heavenly south would be affected by the release of the devilish qi, none of them were interested in sacrificing themselves in preventing this as they already cultivated to such a high stage. If worst came to worst, they would flee from the heavenly south altogether. They will be able to easily find a place for themselves in the world with their level of cultivation. And apart from Hanli, there was no one else that could delve deep enough to place the formation plate, causing the three great cultivators to look at each other in dismay. Then, Hanli's eyes wandered for a moment before speaking with a relaxed voice. I am also aware that this matter is quite serious and that you all find yourselves facing a dilemma. As such, I have an idea I wish to try. When Master Sunreach heard this, he hastily said, "What's your idea? Please, tell us." Wei Wuya and Devil Concord felt this spirits roused and hastily turned to Hanli. "It's rather simple. I believe I am able to reach the designated location for the formation plate with the divine Devil Bane lightning, but I will not have enough to safely return. As such, you will need to hand over the devil warding treasures you've gathered over to me so that I will last longer in the devilish chi. However, since this method does pose quite a bit of danger to me." With that said, Hanli paused as if hesitant to continue. With joy on his face, Wei Wuya hastily said, "That will be no problem. So long as you can place down the formation plate, we'll lend fellow Daoist Han all of the devil warding treasures we've acquired. Of course, we won't have you brave this grave danger for nothing." Master Sunreach suddenly smiled at Devil Concord and said, "Brother Concord, what do you say?" Devil Concord was stunned when he heard this, but after some hesitation, he nodded. "Indeed, if you accomplish this, we plan on handing over one of these islands over to fellow Daoist Han. You would present one of the islands to me?" Hanli's narrowed his eyes. "That's right," Master Sunreach said with a friendly voice. "To tell the truth, we planned on dividing the islands between 7 great sects, but a majority of those sects belonged to our 3 superpowers. There is one island that is difficult to divide. We originally planned on handing it over to fellow Taoists Long Han and Feng Bing, one, but it turned out that the 2 are in seclusion. As such, we've decided to hand it over to a small unremarkable sect." On one hand, he had done this to haggle over the rewards as Master Sunreach had previously informed him that there were possible benefits. On the other hand, he had done this to avoid the 3 from realizing how much divine Devil Bane lightning he possessed. In the future, the only things that could pose a threat against Hanli in the heavenly south would be the 3 great cultivators and the Milan divine sages. He had no choice but to deceive them. 1. The strongest cultivator pair in the Heavenly Tao Alliance. They are mid-nascent soul stage Tao companions that can match a late-nascent soul cultivator when joined together. Like the last time Hanli delved into the abyss of devilish chi, he was protected in a net of divine Devil Bane lightning. Soon, the rings of thunder grew softer as he delved deeper, and soon the golden lightning could no longer be seen. On the surface of the ocean, the 3 great cultivators were talking with one another as Hanli delved deeper. "Brother Sunreach, do you feel that fellow Daoist Han truly doesn't have enough divine Devil Bane lightning to make the entire trip? Will his lightning be consumed too quickly to have any remaining for the trip back?" Wei Wuya asked with his hands behind his back. "Does Brother Wei mean to say that my previous words were false?" Master Sunreach's expression sank and he appeared displeased. Wei Wuya chuckled and said, "Please don't misunderstand me, I didn't mean that at all. I simply asked because I felt that fellow Daoist Han agreed far too easily." Master Sunreach's expression relaxed and he said, "If that's the case, I'm not too sure myself. However, I consumed greater amounts of magic power the deeper I delved into the abyss of devilish chi. I imagine one would need an astonishing amount of divine Devil Bane lightning if they wish to make a whole round trip. I don't believe fellow Daoist Han can accomplish this with his lightning alone. Perhaps he has something else that can withstand the devilish chi for a time. That is quite possible. After all, there are an endless number of mysteries and wonders in the cultivation world. But regardless of how it is said, it will be good if this calamity could be smoothly resolved." Wei Wuya spoke with a smile and took a glance at Devil Concord. The large black-robed man had his arms crossed as he glanced down at the whirlpool, his face emotionless as he remained silent. For the time being, silence filled the air. 10 kilometers deep into the devilish chi, a light barrier surging with golden lightning was floating motionlessly. Hanli was inside it, solemnly reading through the jade slip that detailed where the formation plate should be placed. A short moment later, Hanli withdrew his spiritual sense from the jade slip and looked around. His surroundings were completely devoid of light, not surprising as he already reached the farthest depths of the devilish chi abyss. Hanli frowned and opened his mouth, spitting out an inch-long golden sword. In a flicker of golden light, the small sword flew out of the light barrier with a layer of thin lightning covering the body of the blade. It circled around him before revolving above his head, turning into a strange inch-large golden ring of light. Hanli formed an incantation gesture and pointed at the ring of light above his head, ordering it to suddenly stop and shoot out in a streak of golden light. He then closely followed after it in a blur. He flew a meter across the abyss before the small golden sword suddenly shot downward and released a muffled bang. The flying sword had pierced into something. A trace of joy appeared on Hanli's face and arrived 3 meters above where the sword had landed. In the pitch-black darkness, all he could see was the faint light of the small sword flickering with lightning. It had pierced into a huge flat rock. Hanli muttered to himself for a moment and pressed one of his hands against his light barrier. The net of lightning surrounding the barrier suddenly surged with blinding light and released several dense bolts of golden lightning that quickly revolved in the nearby area, turning into several golden pythons. As a result, the golden pythons cleanly swept away all the devilish chi in the nearby area, illuminating the huge rock underneath. Hanli examined it for a moment and revealed shock. This wasn't a rock, but rather the floor of an altar. It appeared to stretch beyond the range of the golden lightning. He was amazed. The area that the formation masters wished to bury the formation plate was unexpectedly remarkable. Hanli commanded the golden pythons to quickly envelop the rest of the altar, revealing its general appearance. It was a square building that stretched out about 100 meters. All of the characteristics and engravings on the stone walls illustrated that it was a building created by cultivators from antiquity. After Hanli viewed his surroundings, he waved to the sword embedded in the floor and it returned to his sleeve in a golden streak. He then flew towards the center of the building and after a short moment, it began to flicker with white light. His heart stirred at the sight and he sped up, eventually clearly seeing what lay at its center. It was a shattered stone tablet. Only a small portion of its foundation remained standing upright with the rest of its fragments scattered around. Hanli's eyes wandered around the stone tablet as he observed it. Although it was shattered, he was able to see a few worn talisman characters that he couldn't understand. It was unknown what kind of material it was carved from as it would only occasionally sparkle with a faint white light. Could it be a rare material on par with the gold lightning bamboo? Hanli thought. Soon, he reached out towards a fist-sized piece of the stone tablet and his hand glowed with azure light before summoning it into his grasp. The stone piece was gray and unremarkable. If it weren't for the traces of spiritual light, Hanli wouldn't have found anything particular about it. Hanli looked at it several more times and his brows stirred before he suddenly exerted great strength into his grasp. As a result, a strange scene occurred. The stone wasn't crushed to powder as Hanli thought. Instead, it flickered with white light and suddenly turned soft, allowing his fingers to sink deep into the stone. Hanli felt his heart jump. He frowned and asked Monarch Soul Divergence, Senior Soul Divergence, "Do you know what this is?" "No, I've never seen it before," Monarch Soul Divergence said with a lazy tone, "but this is no surprise. There were so many rare materials used during ancient times, it is impossible for someone to know them all. You may as well let me research that piece. I am idle and have little better to do." Then without another thought, Hanli tossed the stone piece into the bamboo tube behind him. Light flashed from the bamboo tube and a mist of white light sucked the strange stone inside of it. Han Li quickly turned his attention to the shattered stone tablet. It hadn't been long since it was shattered, and it appeared that when the spell formation was damaged, the stone tablet had shattered as well. With that thought, Han Li collected the rest of the stone fragments in a sweep of azure light. He then flicked his fingers and launched over 10 streaks of azure sword light at the stone foundation, wishing to take the rest of it with him. A series of booms sounded out, and to Han Li's surprise, the sword chi wasn't able to cut through the stone. It didn't seem to have any effect. How strange! Han Li yelped in alarm and hesitated for a moment. He no longer paid attention to the rest of the stone tablet and launched several streaks of sword chi in a different direction. Although he had enough divine devil-bane lightning to sustain for a while longer, Han Li didn't dare to linger too long in such a dangerous place and began to place down the formation plate. A series of muffled explosions sounded out, followed by the appearance of a 3-meter-deep hole at the side of the stone tablet. With a wave of his hand, white light flickered and an exquisite formation plate appeared. Han Li shook his hand without the slightest hesitation and sent the formation plate into the hole in a streak of light. Grimly staring at the formation plate, his 2 hands then formed a hand incantation and the formation plate began to shine with even greater light. Soon, the formation plate released a clear ring and a thick beam of white light shot out towards the sky, only to disappear without a trace. Han Li felt at ease. Since the formation plate was functioning as expected, he had clearly found the right place. With that thought, Han Li swept up an azure gale with a wave of his sleeve, completely burying the hole with rocks. He then released a spell seal and muttered an incantation before melting the pile of rocks to seal the hole completely in a smooth layer. The hole now appeared as if it never existed. Han Li walked around the large hole to make sure that nothing appeared out of the ordinary, and he nodded with a satisfied expression. With that done, he released several spell seals, striking the nearby golden lightning pythons. With pangs of thunder, the lightning pythons faded away into specks of light and the devilish chi began to quickly roil as there was no longer anything holding it back. Han Li pondered to himself before the lightning flashed around his light barrier, preparing to rush back up to the ocean surface. At that moment, Monarch Soul Divergence's voice echoed through his spiritual sense, "Youngster, wait a moment." Han Li stopped in surprise and asked, "What does Senior have to say?" Since this is the center of the sealing formation, it is also the densest area of devilish chi, and since it has been suppressed since ancient times, it is possible several devil essence diamonds have formed here. According to ancient records, they were a material used to refine precious devil Dao treasures. You should see if you can find them nearby. Devil essence diamonds. An awed expression appeared on his face. Then after some thought, he slapped his storage pouch and took out a yellow jade scepter with a wolf's head. This was the ancient treasure that originally housed Silvermoon. Although its artifact spirit was missing, it was still capable of using simple earth movement techniques, but not to the superb skill that Silvermoon was capable of. Ying Lu bitterly smiled and said, "So long as Sir Immortal agrees, I am willing to give 25 spirit stones. I'll be honest. Our Grey Heron tribe isn't large. This is the limit that we can offer you." The white-robed man smiled in response. 25 spirit stones is a good amount, but don't you want to ask me of my rank before naming your price? Perhaps I am only at the 3rd or 2nd layer of chi condensation without the ability to protect you. Ying Lu forced a chuckle and said, "Sir Immortal is joking. Although I don't have any spirit roots, I've gained much experience in my time in the Holy War. The light you released isn't something that a 3rd-grade chi condensation immortal could produce." Without further consideration, the white-robed man said, "Good. Since you are so sincere, I will journey with you. However, I will be taking half of the spirit stones first." Once we arrive, you can pay me the other half. Of course, here are the spirit stones, Sir Immortal. Ing Lu was happy with his reply and patted his robes before taking out a small pouch. He then picked out a number of spirit stones and promptly handed them over to the white-robed man. After the white-robed man took the spirit stones, they disappeared in a flash of light. This caused some of the youths to yelp in surprise. What? You've never seen a storage pouch before? The white-robed man asked in surprise. Sir Immortal, these youths haven't had much experience with immortals. Ing Lu said with slight embarrassment. So it was like that. The white-robed man nodded in understanding and then glanced at the carriages with some hesitation. As Ing Lu had many dealings with immortals in the past, he immediately shouted, "Quickly prepare the best carriage for Immortal Han and allow him to meditate. Hurry!" When the youths heard their leader, they awoke from their daze and completely unloaded one of the carriages and put the cargo onto the other carriages. Once the carriage was completely unloaded, the white-robed man faced Ing Lu and said, "Thank you for your consideration. I will be resting on the carriage. Just call out to me if anything happens. And since I'm already fasting, there is no need to disturb me during peacetime." "Of course, I will keep it in mind." Ing Lu bowed and widely smiled. The white-robed man nodded and promptly approached the carriage in strides, but after taking several steps, he suddenly turned to the youth Tu Meng and coldly said, "Did you see my face? I don't want rumors to spread, so you had best keep it to yourself." The white-robed man didn't say another word and then climbed on the carriage, closing the curtains and blocking everything from view. Tu Meng's face turned deathly pale. Although the white-clothed man had already entered the carriage, the youth was still repeatedly shaking his head. Ing Lu loudly shouted, "Since we've acquired an immortal, we may journey with ease." Everyone set off. In a moment of desperation, he hastily landed in the shrubbery and without the time to even place down a protective spell formation, he employed the pestilence demon's soul-lock seal with frantic need. When Ing Lu had arrived, Han Li was in the final stages of employing the technique. The youth Mu Ting parted the shrubbery just as Han Li's face wore the appearance of one of the 5 pestilence demons sealed inside of him. It was incredibly gruesome, giving the youth much cause for fright. The youth currently believed the ghost face to be Han Li's true appearance. With that thought, Han Li couldn't help but wryly smile. Although I am temporarily able to restrain the baleful qi, a vast majority of my cultivation was sealed. It is fortunate that I am escorting these mortals to an endless sky temple. Nothing should happen along the way. Han Li muttered. Monarch's Soul Divergence coldly chuckled and said, "Although your cultivation is sealed and you aren't able to use your ancient treasures and flying swords, you can still use your gold-devouring beetle and second nascent soul. However, you did give the nascent soul grade puppet you refined to your senior martial brother Lu before you left, and you also gave a majority of your core formation stage puppets to that concubine of yours. Those puppets would be rather useful right now." Han Li indifferently said, "I didn't know when I'd be able to return to the heavenly south, so I had left the puppets behind in case of contingencies. Even if senior martial brother Qing will soon perish, Lu Luo will have the nascent soul stage puppet to assist him. And Mu Peeling will be safe with the tortoise puppets I've given her. Otherwise, I would have felt ill at ease heading towards the Great Gene. In that case, don't complain about any dangers you encounter." Monarch's Soul Divergence said with disapproval. After a moment of silence, Han Li's expression stirred and he asked, "Is there any way to temporarily dissolve the pestilence demon's soul-lock after it is placed? My gold-devouring beetles and second nascent soul shouldn't have any problem dealing with core formation opponents, of course, but it will be dangerous if I run into an enemy at nascent soul stage. I don't know how long it will take before I can find a method to dissolve my baleful qi. Temporarily dissolve the seal." Monarch's Soul Divergence paused for a moment before slowly replying, it might not be possible for others, but it could be possible with the many treasures in your possession. However, the cost will be steep. What cost? So long as it doesn't affect my future cultivation, I will accept the cost. It will be better than losing my life at a desperate moment. In that case, it will be quite simple. Each time you wish to dispel the seal, it will require 2 drops of the myriad-year spirit milk. I'll give you another set of secret techniques to release the pestilence demons and temporarily allow the baleful chi. Under these current circumstances, being able to unleash such a ferocious insect will be very useful in protecting his life. As Han Li's heart stirred, the small flag in his hand grew several times in size and the matured gold-devouring beetle revolved once around him before landing on the banner. Black chi surged around the banner and then the beetle disappeared without a trace. Soon after, Han Li unceremoniously tossed the banner towards his black-green nascent soul and it opened its mouth with a laugh, absorbing the yin-sifting banner into its body. Then in a flash of light, the nascent soul flew onto the top of Han Li's head and disappeared from sight. Han Li took a deep breath and closed his eyes. He began to comprehend the incantation to dissolve the pestilence demon's soul-lock seal in case of future mishaps, but then his expression stirred and he turned his head to the sky. Although his cultivation was sealed, this hadn't affected Han Li's powerful spiritual sense. If he were correct, a soaring tribe's cultivator had flown above the Grey Heron tribe's escort once more. He found this quite interesting. This soaring tribe's cultivator was clearly looking for him. Over the last 2 weeks, they would fly above the carriage every 3 days or so, but they would rush away each time. They didn't ask any questions to the mortals in the escort either, saving Han Li the effort of using any of the concealment techniques he prepared. Although he felt puzzled by this, Han Li was happy with their search methods and promptly closed his eyes once more. At that moment, Ying Lu loudly shouted to the rest of the escort, "Muster yourselves. In 2 days, we'll arrive at the designated temple encampment. When we get there, we can rest safely for a few days." Temple encampment. When Han Li heard this, his heart stirred. After muttering to himself for a moment, he paid this no further mind and focused again on comprehending the incantation. Half a day later, Han Li sensed a nearby escort from another tribe. The escort didn't appear very large, but they did have a dozen more members than the Grey Heron tribe's escort. From the direction they were heading in, they should meet with the Grey Heron tribe in about 2 hours, but because they appeared harmless, Han Li hadn't mentioned it to Ying Lu. About 2 hours later, the 2 escorts ran across one another, causing quite the disturbance. Both sides scrambled into formation, but it turned out that Ying Lu and the leader of the Red Wolf tribe's escort were old friends. The 2 were overjoyed by their meeting and decided to travel together. The Red Wolf tribe's leader, a large man with a full beard, glanced at Ying Lu's carriages and curiously asked, "Brother Ying, do you have an immortal with your tribe? Is he on a carriage?" Ying Lu didn't answer but asked, "Your tribe's immortals aren't on your carriages. Did you bring them on the journey?" "Immortals?" The large man glanced at Ying Lu with slanted eyes and muttered, "There was only one and he was an unaffiliated immortal that I only acquired by abandoning my pride and paying him at great cost. Could it be that you have 2 immortals?" As the 2 were friends, he spoke without reserve. "2?" Ying Lu sighed and said, "I only have one, of course. I've only managed to barely have him agree to protect us on this journey as well." The 2 then bitterly laughed with a sense of mutual suffering. Ying Lu then added on, "All right. We are now only a day away from the encampment and nothing else should happen. But after that, we will pass by the territory of a large tribe along the way. It will be best to be a bit careful. How about we travel together with a few other small tribes along that way? It will be safer, not to mention that we have an immortal in our ranks." Silvermoon didn't raise any objections to his words. Then, Hanli closed his eyes and continued to sit in silence. A while later, Hanli let out a yelp and shock appeared on his face. This time, Silvermoon tactfully remained silent as Hanli tightly frowned before having sudden changes of expression. Senior Soul Divergence, if I remembered correctly, you said there were many techniques to dissolve my baleful qi. Is it true that most of these techniques are Buddhist? That is true, Monarch Soul Divergence lazily replied. Confucians and Taoists also have many of their own techniques to dissolve baleful qi, but none are as effective as Buddhist techniques. As Hanli's expression wavered, he said, then is it true that the most obvious property of Buddhist techniques is that a majority of them release a seven-colored light when they are activated? That is right. Why? Have you discovered something? Monarch Soul Divergence asked with a curious tone. Hanli lowered his head and muttered, in that case, this person might be useful. This could be an opportunity. Monarch Soul Divergence grew somewhat annoyed that Hanli wouldn't answer his question. Just as he thought to ask more about it, Hanli resolved himself and set forth, riding a magic tool out of his cave in an azure streak. This action came as a surprise to Silvermoon and Monarch Soul Divergence. But after seeing Hanli act with such haste, they could only save their questions for later. Hanli quickly arrived at a small forest rarely seen in the endless sky plains. It spanned about half a kilometer and was made of sparse and short trees. At the center of the forest, there was a patch of empty land that spanned about 30 meters wide where the two previous cultivators resided. The blue-robed cultivator was lying face down on the ground. He was motionless and had a black bloodstain on his back. While it was unknown whether he was still alive, a gorgeous seven-colored light covered his body. There was also other person nearby, a purple-robed old man with eagle-shaped eyes. He was striking at the light barrier with a fire-red flying sword. Although the seven-colored light barrier was unordinary, it had already begun to wildly shake and flash with light as it had no master controlling it. Hanli didn't conceal his sudden approach, alerting the purple-robed old man below. In the old man's shock, he swept his spiritual sense past Hanli and relaxed after finding that he was only a Foundation establishment cultivator. The old man then surged with killing intent and raised his hand, launching a remarkable fast black streak at Hanli. It was a tri-pointed stake wrapped in black qi. Hanli coldly snorted and stroked the top of his head. Then, a black-green cloud flew out from it and transformed into a meter-long hand, swiping at the approaching black streak. The purple-robed old man was shocked when he saw this. Before he realized what was happening, the tri-pointed stake was caught with ease and in an instant, he felt his connection severed. Then, the giant hand began to fly downwards. In the old man's shock, he flusteredly formed incantation gestures, ordering the red flying sword to protect him. But suddenly, the black-green hand disappeared and a second later, it reappeared 3 meters above him as a fist and fiercely smashed down upon him. Ah! The purple-robed old man let out a miserable scream before he was pounded into a bloody mush. Afterwards, the black-green fist unfolded back into a hand and swiped across the old man's remains, taking an egg-sized ball of green light. The hand then immediately shot back in Hanli's direction and circled once around him before transforming back into a nascent soul. The nascent soul sat down on Hanli's shoulder with a beaming smile and held the tri-pointed stake in one hand and a small ball of green light in the other. Hanli's expression stirred at the sight of this. After a moment of thought, he spread his spiritual sense throughout Feng Yu's body and blue light flickered from his eyes. The poison had already spread throughout his body and he should already be dead by all means. Given how odd this was, Hanli carefully continued his examination. A short moment later, Hanli found something and tugged at Feng Yu's collar. With a zap, a piece of his robes tore off, revealing a chain held onto a silver key. The key pulsed with white light and continuously dispersed of the poison at the center of Feng Yu's chest, which had also turned jet black. Han Li's gaze wandered and he grabbed onto Feng Yu's arm. Azure light then glowed from his palm and quickly spread through Feng Yu's body, slowly dispelling the poison. But suddenly, the azure spiritual chi that Han Li released was turning black and it began to quickly spread back to his hand. Agony poison. Han Li yelled and his complexion paled. He immediately withdrew his hand and severed his spiritual chi connection to Feng Yu's arm. One of the 10 absolute poisons. Youngster Han, you've wasted your energy. There is no way of saving this person now. Monarch's soul divergence chuckled and spoke with a tone of schadenfreude. When Han Li heard this, he couldn't help but roll his eyes and annoyedly snort. It might be impossible for me to completely remove the poison, but it won't be difficult for me to awaken him and keep him alive for 10 days. I merely need to use a good number of spirit medicines, but I don't know if it will be worth the cost. With that said, Han Li stood up and wore a pensive expression. Silvermoon then suggested, Master, how about you awaken him first and have him make a few things clear before you come to a decision? That's true. Until I know about his relationship to the Buddhist sects of the Great Jin, I am unwilling to take any further actions. Soon after, Han Li slapped his storage pouch and produced a small white bottle into his hand. Of course. I have no interest in your other affairs. Although we've come to an agreement, let us head somewhere more discreet. This place is too open. Han Li smiled and waved his sleeve at Feng Yu without waiting for him to agree. A gust of azure light blew around Feng Yu and caught him just as he was about to fall. Then with the azure light wrapping around his waist, he began to float off the ground. Although Han Li's cultivation was sealed, he still possessed his superb control of magic power, something far beyond the capability of an ordinary Foundation establishment cultivator. At that moment, his second nascent soul emerged from the forest and reappeared in front of Han Li with a tri-pointed stake in one hand and the purple-robed old man's primal soul in the other. Han Li glanced at the old man's primal soul and emotionlessly said, "There is no use for him. Kill him." When the second nascent soul heard Han Li, it grinned and firmly held onto the primal soul before emitting a black-green flame from its small hand. The green ball trembled for a short moment before turning into ash. At that moment, Han Li flicked his finger and an egg-sized fireball struck the old man's crushed remains, giving them a blazing cremation. Soon after, Han Li waved at the ground and the old man's storage pouch and small fire-red sword flew into his hand. Then after tidying up the rest of the traces of what had happened nearby, Han Li brought Feng Yu to the sky before dropping down to the field of rocks where he had set up his temporary shelter. Now that his cultivation was restricted, he had no choice but to be careful. Additionally, Han Li felt particularly gloomy about how he wasn't able to employ his immensely powerful spiritual sense. It was on the level of a late nascent soul cultivator, but he took the initiative to conceal most of it. If a Grand Elder of the Soaring Tribes or any of their nascent soul cultivators with strengthened spiritual sense were to detect him, it would be a sure death sentence. As a result, he had pulled back his spiritual sense to only cover the nearby area, preventing any roaming high-grade Soaring Tribes cultivators from noticing it. When Han Li was caught nurturing his gold-devouring beetles, he had been resting a portion of his spiritual sense at the time and had grown careless. Then as it so happened, a mid-nascent soul Soaring Tribes cultivator was pursuing a demon bird at a speed comparable to a late nascent soul cultivator about 10 kilometers away. Even if Han Li had been on guard at the time, he wouldn't have been able to put away his gold-devouring beetles in time and would have encountered disaster regardless. He was truly out of luck for a mid-nascent soul cultivator skilled in movement techniques to come across him in a place as vast as the endless sky plains. And he was convinced that if both sides understood each other's abilities, a battle wouldn't have broken out between them. Every time Han Li recalled this, he found himself not knowing whether to laugh or cry. He now found a majority of his magic power sealed due to the baleful chi backlash. And his opponent only managed to have one of his 7 split nascent souls escape from him. It was likely he suffered a massive loss in cultivation and would take quite some time to recover. The next day, Hanli returned to the encampment. There were far fewer tents there than when he had arrived. It seemed many of the tribes finished resting and had continued on their way. When Hanli found the Grey Heron tribe, they were already prepared to leave and were waiting for Hanli to return. Ying Lu was delighted when he spotted Hanli and hastily invited him into a carriage. He then called for the escort to leave through the other side of the encampment. Hanli sat in his carriage and slowly closed his eyes in preparation to sleep. But against his expectations, the carriage came to a sudden stop right after they left the encampment. "I hope you'll be able to excuse our worries," the old man calmly said. "You don't have to flatter me. If he wasn't injured, even 3 of me wouldn't be his match. But now that he's received an injury from the Grand Elder's elemental immortal Reshpalm, there is no longer anything to fear. As of now, I simply need to keep watch over this area and prevent the foreign cultivator from sneaking away. Our tribe must acquire his method of nurturing so many gold-devouring beetles. This effort has gone so far as to stationing a nascent soul cultivator among all the nearby encampments in hopes of finding him. After we set down an inescapable net and the day of spirit release is concluded, the Saintess and 2 Grand Elders will meet at the nearby temple and use the sacred relic to summon an apparition of the holy beast. Then with the aid of its power, we will quickly find where this foreign cultivator is hidden. It will be impossible for him to escape." The palace-robed woman sighed with relief and said, "So it was like that. I was wondering why we weren't urged to act after we received our orders." The old man snorted and said, "Who do you think your cheap tricks are fooling? However, no one could blame you. Although he is heavily injured, you still aren't a match for him. Not to mention the cultivators dispatched from other areas had mostly behaved the same way. We didn't truly believe that you'd be able to scare him out of hiding. After all, the foreign cultivator's movement techniques are unordinary. Not only is he skilled in earth movement techniques, but he also used that strange blood-red evasion technique. If he were discovered, we wouldn't be able to hold him down without a Grand Elder present. Also, despite what I've told you, you still have to follow your orders on the surface and occasionally sweep across the nearby area." "Yes." The large middle-aged man and the palace-robed woman exchanged a glance and happily agreed. After all, they had been a bit anxious about the way they had been dealing with the situation. Now that they had confirmation, they felt much more at ease. "Ah yes, Senior Ying, since you found the poisoned person in the caravan to be odd, do you wish for him to stay behind so that you might interrogate him?" the large man said in an attempt to curry favor. "That." The old man's heart stirred and he stroked his beard as he pondered. He then waved his hand and said, "Leave it be. It isn't a mystery that he is able to survive if he had some poison-warding treasures or had taken some medicine pills. However, this displays he has some senior backing him. I reckon that he will only have a few days before he perishes. It could be troublesome if he were to die near us." "Yes, it is as you say," the large man said with an embarrassed expression. His attempts at gaining favor had fallen short. At that moment, the old man took another glance in the direction of the caravan and unconsciously frowned. When he first swept his spiritual sense through the caravan, he had felt a cultivator's body that was under the effects of an unordinary constraint, but that sensation was very brief. The second time he examined the caravan, he wasn't able to find any trace of this. This strange occurrence bewildered him and caused him to hesitate. Hanli took a glance at the woman's dainty face and looked the meat she tossed aside, then saying, "I have none. I've meditated enough inside the carriage and thought I'd have a look around." "That." Somewhat at a loss, the woman proposed, "Immortal Han, how about I go fetch you some fresh water? Hanli glanced at the river nearby and nodded. That'll be good. Although I no longer feel the need to eat, a drink of fresh water will be good. When the young woman heard this, she gave a lively response despite the turmoil she felt in her heart and ran to the river with a water sack. When Hanli glanced at her from behind, his heart stirred and he unconsciously smiled. A short moment later, the young woman brought back the water sack and was holding a piece of roasted meat in her hand. She was panting for breath and offered the two items to Hanli with an embarrassed expression. With an earnest tone, the young woman said, "Sir Immortal, the roasted meat is quite good. Will you try some?" Hanli chuckled and said, "Sure. It's been many years since I've eaten something. A bit of food should be interesting." He then accepted the meat and took a bite, finding the taste to be quite good. When the young woman saw this, she revealed an adorable expression. When Hanli was finished with his bite of food, he set it aside and said, "It must have been hard waiting at the side of my carriage. You're participating in the Day of Spirit Release, right? Extend your hand and let me take a look at your spirit roots." "Many thanks, Sir Immortal." When the young woman heard him, she extended wrist with unconcealed excitement. Hanli grabbed the woman's wrist, channeled a bit of spiritual chi into her body and pondered for a moment. If his cultivation hadn't been reduced to foundation establishment stage, he would have been able to examine her aptitude without touching her. "Immortal Han, how is my aptitude? Do I have any chance of becoming an immortal?" the young woman eagerly asked. Her face wore an expression of hopeful excitement. "You should have no problem becoming an immortal, but it can be considered destiny that you've met me. Take the medicine before the spirit release rites." Hanli released his grip on her wrist and summoned a small white bottle with a flick of his hand. "This." The young woman received the small bottle with complete surprise. "Although the medicine pill isn't particularly precious, it will improve your constitution and will aid you on your path to cultivation." The medicine was a marrow-cleansing medicine pill, something valuable to low-grade cultivators but was of little value to Hanli. "Many thanks for Sir Immortal's great kindness." The young woman rejoiced and hastily bowed. "Stand up." Hanli waved his hand at the young woman and said, "Perhaps if fate will have, we'll see each other again in the future. By the way, since this river is so wide, could it be the southern portion of the Heavenly Water River?" The young woman carefully put the bottle away and said, "That's correct, Sir Immortal. It is a branch of the Heavenly Water River. It runs over 50 kilometers down before joining with the true Heavenly Water River." When Hanli heard this, he said nothing else and began to recall all the details pertaining to the Heavenly Water River. If he remembered correctly, the river was incredibly long, earning its title as the largest river in the endless sky plains, and it even reached down to the Jin Empire under the name of the Mystical River. He couldn't help but ponder over this fact. Then, Hanli's expression stirred and he raised his head to look at the sky across the river with a gloomy expression. "Quickly inform the tribe elders that there is something flying towards us," Hanli sullenly commanded. "I don't know if they is passing through or if they're specifically heading towards us." Its exterior was crystalline and its interior shined with a golden flame. Most of its exterior was filthy and unremarkable, but after the earlier steam wiped away the dirt that surrounded it, the stone regained a trace of its original appearance. Just as Hanli was pondering where he had seen this stone before, Monarch's Soul Divergence suddenly shouted out its name, a gold flame stone. "It's actually a gold flame stone. Youngster Han, your luck is quite good." At that moment, he recalled the item was one of the crucial ingredients he needed to craft the seven-flame fan. It hadn't been seen in the heavenly south for countless years and it was only something that could possibly be found in the Great Jin. In a rush of wind, a golden light flashed in front of the middle-aged man and the gold flame stone suddenly flew through the air. Slow to react, he reached out to grab it in his alarm, but the gold flame stone flew out in a streak of light and into Han Li's grasp. In that next moment, all of those present were stunned by what they saw. Han Li was holding the stone in a single hand and was carefully examining it while ignoring everyone else. The middle-aged man's complexion turned pale with rage. He eerily stared at Han Li and uttered, "Give that to me and I'll let you live if you cut off your arm." After Monarch's soul divergence confirmed the gold flame stone was genuine, Han Li put it in his storage pouch with a flip of his hand. He then smiled towards the middle-aged man and said with an indifferent tone, "I also want this item. But I don't wish to give it to you or cripple myself. Would it be better for fellow Daoists to just return without raising a scene?" When the middle-aged man heard this, he grew even more furious and his hands tightened into fists. A foot-wide layer of white light suddenly shined around him as he was about to take action. When the icy woman at his side saw this, she felt there was something amiss about Han Li. Using the language of the Great Gene, she asked, "Commander Gu, what's the matter? What is that strange item? If it isn't important, don't stir up any trouble." When the middle-aged man heard this, he hesitated before sending her a voice transmission. When she heard this, she revealed an astonished expression. Her expression froze and she asked, "Is that true? Are you not mistaken?" "I am absolutely certain I am correct," the middle-aged man said with excitement. "You should also know I was originally a toolsmith and have looked through the Supreme Stone records countless times as a result. If we bring this wondrous treasure back to the Palace Master, the merit we would receive would be far beyond what we would gain from returning the traitor and the snow crystal pearl." When the woman heard this, she looked at Han Li once more and verified he was truly only a Foundation establishment cultivator. A cold light then flickered from her eyes and her heart was filled with killing intent. With a raised brow, the icy woman commanded, "Attack. Kill all of the Soaring Tribe's members. Leave no witnesses. The Endless Sky Temple won't become hostile with our 9 immortals' palace over a few low-grade cultivators and a couple hundred mortals. At worst, we'll merely compensate them for a fraction of the price." She then opened her mouth and spat out a streak of silver light, arriving in front of a Soaring Tribe's Foundation establishment cultivator in an instant. Although the Soaring Tribe's cultivator was protected by a blue barrier, it wasn't able to block the full-powered strike of a core formation cultivator. As a result, a scream sounded out and he was split into two. The silver streak circled once in the air to reveal itself as a sparkling white dagger that was about a foot long. As for the Foundation establishment cultivators from the Great Gene, they immediately complied with the woman's orders and released their magic tools, attacking the remaining Soaring Tribe's cultivators. As for the mortals farther away, they were left alone for the time being since they couldn't run. When the Soaring Tribe's cultivators saw the Great Gene cultivators attacking them, they felt both alarm and fury. However, one of them was at early Foundation establishment stage while the other two were at Qi condensation stage. Against the joint attacks of the 6 Great Gene Foundation establishment cultivators, they were only able to resist for only a moment before being killed. After they were dealt with, the Great Gene Foundation establishment cultivators approached Feng Yu's carriage to deal with him. The icy woman showed indifference at the sight of this as she stood on the bat. In order to succeed with these summoning rites, these 2 Grand Elders have spent over 10 years in preparation. Grand Elders, please present your offerings. The other Soaring Tribe immortals revealed excitement upon hearing this. The elegant man and purple-haired beauty glanced at one another and smiled before they clapped their palms together, shaking the ground with a series of heavy thuds. This came as a great shock to many of those present and they hastily looked around them. 2 groups of 6-meter-tall copper statues walked in from both sides of the plaza. There were 8 statues in each group and their bodies shined with golden light. They were all holding 2 huge wooden palanquin as they slowly made their way towards the altar. When the bronze statues brought the palanquin in front of the altar and placed it down, even the more collected bystanders couldn't help but gasp in shock at the sight of what was on it. On one palanquin there was a large bison that glowed with azure light. On the other was a huge white python coiled up. They were both soundly asleep on the palanquins. The most notable thing about these demon beasts was the demonic chi their bodies emitted. It indicated these demon beasts were at the peak of grade 7 and were on the verge of becoming fearsome grade 8 demon beasts. It was no wonder why the Grand Elders spent such a long time before they managed to capture them alive. The silver-clothed woman coolly swept her gaze across those present and calmly said, "This is an azure wind bison and an ice armor python. They are rarely ever found and will be suitable sacrifices. We will have to see whether or not they will be enough for the sacred beast's incarnation to remain in our mortal world. Let us now begin preparations for the sacrifice." She then waved towards the huge beasts on the palanquins. Suddenly, silver threads shot out from her hand and tightly wrapped around the beasts. Silver light then glowed from the threads and the huge beasts began to float from the ground and make their way towards the altar. At that moment, the azure bison began to awaken, and when it saw what was happening, it knew it was in danger and began to shake its body in an attempt to break free. However, there were several types of restrictions placed on its body as well as over 100 silver chains restricting it, preventing it from moving in the slightest. It could only watch in furious alarm as it floated towards the altar. Its attempts to roar were in vain as its mouth was tightly shut. The silver-robed woman turned towards the altar and flicked her sleeve, launching a fist-sized ball of azure light in the air. It circled once around the bowl before stopping above it and revealing itself to be a small cauldron wrapped in faint azure flames. It continued to spin in place as it floated in the air. The saintess formed a hand gesture and began to slowly mutter an incantation. The azure flames surged around the cauldron, causing it to gradually grow to 3 meters in height. If Hanlit saw this, he would have been shocked, dumbstruck. Apart from the cauldron's flames, it looked almost exactly the same as the Heaven Void cauldron. It had both a similar shape and similar decorative carvings on its surface. The endless sky saintess gradually sped up her incantations and extended her finger at the cauldron, ordering its lid to launch into the air in a streak of azure light. Then, sparkling grains of sand flew out from the cauldron and enveloped the altar, entrancing all the spectators present. When the saintess saw this, she stopped her incantations and pointed to the chained bison on the altar. In a flash of light, the silver chains constricted, tightly digging into the beast's flesh until they cut through it like 1,000 blades, splitting the beast into over 100 pieces and filling the air with the scent of blood. The azure sand began to stream onto the silver chains and densely cover the altar. Then, the bison's corpse began to pulse in azure light as the sand gradually consumed its flesh, much to the shock of those watching. A ball of green light suddenly flew out from the bison's corpse and directly shot into the air. It was the primal soul that the azure wind bison had strenuously cultivated for many years. But before it could travel far, several bolts of azure light streaked out from the altar and struck it down, submerging it into the streams of sand below. After the time it took to finish a meal, the huge beast's corpse had completely disappeared. The entirety of its flesh and bones had been consumed by the azure sand, with each grain containing a trace of its blood. When the saintess saw this, she calmly waved towards the huge white python and the chains tightened around it, silently bringing it to the top of the altar. A similar sacrifice occurred with the python. With the flesh and souls of the 2 grade 7 demon beasts consumed, the azure sand transformed into a cloud of blood above the altar and floated there motionlessly. Then, the saintess used an incantation gesture to will the huge cauldron to slowly float from the altar in a series of trembles. She turned to the 2 late nascent soul cultivators behind her and respectfully said, "I am going to start summoning the holy beast. Please lend me your power." The elegant youth smiled and calmly said, "Of course. We will do our utmost." The purple-haired woman pursed her lips in a smile as well. The saintess nodded and raised her hands. She flicked her fingers and repeatedly struck the surrounding spell formation with spell seals. Soon, it began to shine with bright light in activation. Both the huge cauldron on the altar and the spell formation underneath began to pulse azure light in synchronization. The azure flame on the cauldron also weakened. The saintess walked half a step forward and raised her head, uttering a cryptic incantation. Then the two grand immortals placed a hand on the saintess' shoulders and slowly channeled spiritual power into her body. The saintess' body glowed with silver light and the pattern of a flood dragon with an ox head appeared on her forehead. She pressed her hands together and then opened them to release two beams of pure spiritual power at the cauldron. As the cauldron spun, it absorbed the white light without end. And soon, it began to spout out a mist of azure light that soon condensed into a head-sized ball of light above the cauldron. As time went on, more of the mist concentrated in the ball and glowed with blinding light. The saintess' expression turned grim when she saw this, and the beams of light in her hand fluctuated in size as if attempting to control the cauldron. The two grand immortals continued to pour in spiritual power into the saintess' body, not daring to stop or neglect their task. As time slowly passed by, the ball of light grew more dazzling and began to release a sharp shriek. At that moment, the spell formation surrounding them began to hum and continuously release beams of various colored light towards the ball. The saintess' expression grew stern with caution and she began to quicken her incantation. A while later, the ball of light shrunk before rupturing into a blazing azure sun. It faded away to reveal an egg-sized azure hole floating in the air. The hole only existed for a short time before fading away. Soon, a scarlet light shot out from the hole and charged into the cloud of blood above. The scarlet light was a magnet to the bloody grains in the cloud, drawing the sand towards itself in a rush and tightly covering it in a squirming foot-large crimson cocoon. The soaring tribe immortals watching this were dumbstruck by the sight. The saintess silently pointed at the huge cauldron, causing countless azure threads to shoot out from it, wrapping around the crimson cocoon and dragging it into the cauldron. Then, its lid slammed down onto the cauldron and sealed it. Azure flames surged to 10 meters in height around the cauldron, completely submerging it. The spell formation below the altar then began to flicker with light and condense an astonishing spiritual chi that slowly poured into the flames. When the saintess saw this, she sighed with relief. The saintess turned around and spoke with a clear voice. The ritual was finished smoothly. However, we will need to wait a month before we can see the result of the Holy Beast's incarnation. Of course, even if the Holy Beast incarnation can't remain long in our mortal realm, it will last at least a week. This will be more than enough time for the Holy Beast to find the foreign cultivator. After the Holy Beast completes its sculpted body, the two grand immortals and I will lead the hunt for the foreign cultivator. Before this, everyone should rest and prepare yourselves. Naturally, the soaring tribe immortals didn't raise any objections to this and they all departed. However, a few were curious and couldn't help but take a few more glances at the huge cauldron. Not long after, only the saintess and the two grand immortals remained in the restricted area. Fellow Daoist Su, immortal son. The saintess called out to the two late nascent soul cultivators and said, I must trouble you two to guard the cauldron for 2 days to prevent anything unexpected from happening. Of course, the purple-haired woman immediately replied, we don't wish for our 10 years of effort to fail while we're on the verge of success. The elegant man nodded and said nothing else. The saintess relaxed when she heard this, but then, a series of thunderous growls faintly shook the cauldron and caused her expression to freeze. Soon after, the 3 cultivators present exchanged a glance and promptly sat cross-legged around the altar. 2 days later, the sounds of a bell repeatedly rang throughout the endless sky temples. The many low-grade cultivators and tribes that still remained at the temples looked at them with astonishment. Afterwards, over a dozen streaks of light tore through the sky and flew south without any intention of stopping. Although the streaks of light traveled quickly and no one could see who was flying inside them, it was obvious that none of these streaks of light could have belonged to low-grade cultivators, much to the shock of those who saw them. 3 days later, an azure streak flew past the southern end of the Heavenly Water River, the endless sky plain's largest river. It flew a large circle on the river's surface, revealing itself to be a crimson flood dragon with an ox head. The flood dragon was only a dozen meters long, and a layer of faint azure light covered it, obscuring its precise appearance. The endless sky saintess was floating above its head, as she examined the surface of the water. A moment later, several streaks of light flashed from the sky and 2 grand immortals had appeared. "Fellow Daoist Lin, has the holy beast found him?" the purple-haired woman asked. The saintess answered, "Definitely. Since this person is carrying so many gold-devouring beetles, he won't be able to conceal himself from the holy beast. He shouldn't be far from the surface of the water. This person is truly cunning to flee when the holy beast submerged. It was how he was able to conceal himself from us so many times. Let us go." "Good," the elegant man coldly replied. "I also wish to see whether or not he is truly a Yin-sifting sect elder." He was already struck by Brother Hu's elemental immortal rest palm, but he is still able to safely evade us. I truly wish to see what he is capable of. I heard this person's appearance wasn't very tall and he seemed young. I also wish to see who is this powerful character, the purple-haired woman said. Since you two are so eager, let's go. The silver-robed woman chuckled, and then a silver mark appeared on her forehead. By using some sort of ancient language, she spoke into their holy beast beneath her with a respectful tone. Afterwards, the holy beast snorted and took off in a streak of azure light. When the other cultivators saw this, they hastily followed after her. They followed the river for over 200 kilometers before finding a section of narrow river channels. Afterwards, a faint crimson streak emerged from the water and streaked far into the distance before suddenly disappearing. The saintess waited for her two companions to catch up and said, "Not good." The foreign cultivator had sensed something and used a secret evasion technique to run. He is now over 100 kilometers away. It will be troublesome given how powerful this person's spiritual sense is. The others are too slow. Let's go ahead and block his path. Otherwise, it is going to be hard to track him again. The two grand immortals didn't raise any objections. They promptly raised their hands and sent a voice transmission to the few cultivators following them. Then the three quickly followed the foreign cultivator's track with all their speed. Although they were so far away and weren't able to lock their spiritual sense onto the foreign cultivator, the incarnation of their holy beast possessed profound and great abilities. The three were right on his tail. The chase continued for an entire day. Although Hanli would use the blood shadow evasion technique to separate from them by a huge distance, they would soon track him down and give chase once more. Hanli was forced to unseal his cultivation 3 times, and now that he was still unable to shake them off, his heart grew sullen. "Senior, I've already shaken off these soaring tribes' cultivators 3 times and left a large distance between them each time, but they were always soon to catch my trail. Could it be there is some spiritual sense-strengthening technique that is beyond the Great Development Technique? How can they catch sight of me so far away?" Hanli asked, his complexion deathly pale from strain. At that moment, Hanli had already lifted the Solok seal and was flying through the air in an azure streak. He had done this 3 times already to make use of the blood shadow evasion technique each time, bringing Hanli's body to the brink of crisis. If he wasn't using several high-grade secret techniques to forcefully suppress his baleful chi backlash and his use of a dozen drops of myriad spirit milk to make up for the blood essence requirement of blood shadow evasion, he feared he wouldn't be able to press on. And under such strain, he had already lost 3 years of his cultivation. If it weren't for the many medicine pills he had taken, it was quite possible that he would have dropped to an entire level of cultivation. With his body pushed to its limits and the late nascent soul cultivators pursuing him, he found himself in dire crisis. But before he figured out how the soaring tribe's immortals were tracking him, he couldn't rashly make use of the blood shadow evasion technique. Otherwise, he'd be ruining himself only for them to eventually track him down. Monarch's Soul Divergence coldly snorted and said, "Although I am completely confident in my great development arts, I don't dare to boast it as the #1 spiritual sense technique in the cultivation world. There aren't many who possess aptitude greater than mine, but they do exist. The possibility of them possessing a particularly powerful technique is minuscule. However, those chasing you aren't tracking you down through an immensely powerful spiritual sense. Instead, they are tracking you through inhuman means." When Hanli heard this, he came to a sudden realization. Inhuman means? You mean that demon beast? That's right. Didn't you sense something similar to a demon beast behind you? Its appearance is exactly the same as what the soaring tribe's mortal described of their patron god, the Endless Sky Beast. Those people from the Endless Sky temples most likely summoned the beast to deliberately reclaim the face they lost from having their nascent soul immortals killed by you. It isn't odd for something not from this world to be able to track you down. Hanli frowned and hesitantly asked, "The Endless Sky Beast?" "I've made note of it, but this particular beast only possessed magic power around the level of a grade 7 demon beast, far inferior to the Milan's sacred bird. How can it possess such abilities?" I've heard you speak of your continent's war against the Milan and how they summoned a projection of their sacred bird with the assistance of a treasure. It merely possessed an illusory body and emerged in this world from nowhere. From what I sensed, the demon beast following you should have a genuine body. If that's the case, the Endless Sky Beast seemed to use an ability similar to the Elder Devil's possession through the use of some other beasts as a medium to bring itself into this world. Do not underestimate the abilities this incarnation possesses. If you give it enough time, it will grow into a fearsome existence. To the best of my knowledge, there are several other similar incarnations that descended into this world, but they are all fearsome to behold. And they are rarely ever seen by common cultivators. There are such kind of beings in our mortal world. However, there is no time for me to further discuss this matter with you. Regardless of whether this is a demon beast or a holy beast, does Senior have a method of escaping its pursuit? It will be greatly troublesome if the seal continues to be lifted. As Hanli swept his spiritual sense behind him, he spotted 3 cultivators and a demon beast in the distance behind him and grew apprehensive as a result. Monarch's Soul Divergence answered, "There are countless strange beasts in the upper realms. Who knows what kind of amazing abilities it is using to track you? Your chi restraining abilities are quite to my satisfaction as well. It appears there are no good methods apart from slaying this beast. However, I can instruct you on a simple method of feigning death, capable of extinguishing all signs of life from your body, but I do not know how useful this will be. After all, the demon beast might not be tracking you down through your aura." Hanli grew silent and then a cold glint flickered from his eyes. He fiercely said, "Fine, then I will kill this beast." Monarch's Soul Divergence said with alarm, "I fear you won't have the opportunity to kill that beast. It is being accompanied by 2 grand immortals, and that masked mid-nascent soul stage woman should be the Endless Sky Saintess. Her abilities shouldn't be anything to underestimate either. If I don't take the risk, there will be no opportunities. I will have to treat my second nascent soul as a disposable resource if I am to succeed," Hanli said with an icy tone. Silvermoon then said, "Master, if you plan on doing that, I also wish to help you." After hearing her, Hanli asked, "How are your injuries? Will you be able to persist in drawing their attention away as an artifact spirit?" Silvermoon smiled and said, "I am the artifact spirit of Master's magic treasure. No matter how severe my injuries may be, so long as Master's flying swords aren't destroyed, I will not die. Master doesn't need to worry much on my behalf. At most, I will only remain asleep in Master's magic treasure for a few years." After some consideration, Hanli sighed and said, "All right. Since our current situation is far from good, I will have to trouble you." Afterwards, Hanli learned the incantation for feigning death from Monarch's soul divergence. With that memorized, he then immediately placed his hand on the top of his head. His second nascent soul appeared in a flash of black light and spat out the Yin-sifting banner from its mouth. It then shook the flag without end and leaped into the air. In the blink of an eye, black clouds gathered around them in a storm, darkening the sky for a whole kilometer and filling the air with devilish chi. "Take this. If the endless sky saintess chases after you with the beast, use this sword to strike it down," Hanli said with an imposing tone. Then with a wave of his hand, he summoned a small crimson sword and tossed it into the black clouds. It was the Blood Devil sword. Afterwards, a piercing shriek echoed from the clouds and the sword flew off with astonishing momentum. Hanli glanced at the devilish cloud in the distance with a sullen expression. Then, he summoned a small bottle with a flip of his hand and poured a drop of myriad-year spirit milk into his mouth. Hanli looked at Silvermoon's transformed appearance as she departed, sighing in amazement at her impressive illusion. In all manners of appearance and aura, she appeared exactly the same as him. Does Senior believe Silvermoon's illusion techniques will allow her to trick the two pursuers? Hanli asked Monarch's soul divergence. In any case, they should most likely not be able to see through her since I can't detect anything either. Your artifact spirit is quite unique. Even I am unable to completely see through her illusion. At one moment, her illusion is weaker and in another, it is stronger. If it weren't for the holy beast of theirs, they definitely wouldn't be able to differentiate between the two of you. After a moment of silence, Hanli's feeling of unease still remained, but he flew in the opposite direction of Silvermoon regardless. Of course, Hanli couldn't have known that giving Silvermoon a portion of the gold-devouring beetles was an unintentionally effective move. When the soaring tribe's immortals saw that Hanli split into two and were heading in different directions, the purple-haired woman and the saintess exchanged a look of dismay and stopped. The purple-haired woman brushed the hair from her face and she clicked her tongue in amazement. What is this? An incarnation technique? Their auras and spiritual chi fluctuate at the same strength and they both appear entirely the same. That cultivator truly has many techniques. Feeling quite the headache from this sudden development, the saintess said, "The distance is too far between them. There is no way of telling which one is the genuine of the two with our spiritual sense. I'll have the holy beast examine them." Soon after, the woman uttered a few words to the endless sky beast with an ancient language. Azure light then flashed from the beast's body and the pair of bull horns on its body became crystalline and transparent. It cried out several times and it gave the saintess an answer with its spiritual sense. "It is truly troublesome. He might have discovered we were tracking him through the scent of the gold-devouring beetles. Both of these doppelgangers possess the beetles and the holy beast isn't able to differentiate them." The purple-haired woman raised her brow and said, "If that's the case, we can't let either of them escape. It's no matter. Let us each pursue one of them each. Now that we're so close and he's using such tricks to split us apart, he shouldn't have anything else up his sleeve. Since he plans on dividing our forces, how about we properly oblige him?" The saintess then wore a cold smile. "Yes, but I heard that while this person possesses mid-nascent soul cultivation, his abilities are no weaker than a late-nascent soul cultivator," the purple-haired woman worriedly said. "However, he's injured so you shouldn't have much to fear from him if you encounter his true self. I will chase the other one. So long as he doesn't use any wicked movement techniques, I should be able to deal with him and join back with you. Please don't worry, Immortal Sunday. Although that crimson movement technique is strange, it clearly comes at great cost, or he would have already used it to leave us behind. He's managed to escape us until now, but I reckon he is at the end of the line. I also have the Holy Cauldron to protect me so there are no worries." The saintess smiled and spoke with confidence. In that case, it should be fine. I'll be heading out first. The purple woman smiled and then flew off in a purple streak of light, chasing after one of the Hanlis. As for the saintess, she chased after the other one with a cold glint of light flashing from her eyes. With a rare tone of concern, Monarch's Soul Divergent said, "They've separated as you've expected. Youngster Han, your plan to separate them was truly effective. It appears their holy beast only has a fraction of its soul and is still lacking in its abilities. Even if you don't kill that endless sky beast soon, the duration of the seal release will run out and the two grand immortals will return. You'll be left in dire straits, not to mention the endless sky saintess won't be easy to deal with either." Han Li used his spiritual sense to look at the saintess trailing behind him and he sullenly replied, "I have a plan. I don't wish to kill the woman, only the holy beast. It shouldn't take much time." "Oh. Then I will wait and see what happens," Monarch's Soul Divergence said with a calm tone. Han Li didn't reply. When the time came and he felt an opportunity was about to arrive, he suddenly flew in a circle and slapped his storage pouch, releasing several thousands of gold-devouring beetles in a surging rush. They formed a golden buzzing cloud that revolved in the air. Then, several tens of sparkling gold flying swords shot out from his sleeve. Under the control of a spell seal, they transformed into over 100 astonishing sword lights wrapped around his body. After forming 2 incantation gestures, he shouted, "Join." The sword lights trembled and flew upward, filling the air with blinding golden light. In the blink of an eye, it formed an imposing 20-meter-long sword. Han Li then opened his mouth and spat out a ball of purple flames. It transformed into a foot-long bird and charged into the huge sword. The purple firebird ruptured and covered the huge sword in a layer of purple flames. Countless small arcs of golden lightning then flashed from within the purple flames, in a display of immense power. Han Li frowned when he saw this. After some thought, he spat a mist of azure chi onto the sword. Suddenly, the arcing lightning from the sword disappeared without a trace. He nodded with satisfaction from the sight and under his mental command, the golden sword pierced into the sky, instantly entering the black clouds and disappearing without a trace. At that moment, a faint speck of light could be seen from the horizon. It was the endless sky saintess. Han Li narrowed his eyes when he saw her and his sleeve trembled, summoning a set of azure flying swords that began to circle around him. A blue shield then flew out from his other sleeve to block his front. He flipped his 2 palms to summon an ancient purple mirror he acquired from Devil Fall Valley in one hand, and his spirit subjugation talisman in the other. With the Solok seal lifted, the last use of his talisman should raise his cultivation to an even higher level than the last 2 times he used it. Having thought that, he quietly waited in place for the saintess to arrive. Although the holy beast didn't possess a high cultivation, its speed was truly unordinary. In a span of a few breaths, it quickly arrived several hundred meters in front of Han Li. Han Li coldly examined the saintess and then turned to look at the endless sky beast. Apart from its large bull head, he wasn't able to make out anything particularly fearsome about it. With a large clap, the silver threads struck the ice wall and created a dense grouping of holes. It nearly appeared as if the ice wall was on the verge of collapsing from the damage. When Han Li saw this, he raised his hand and struck the ice wall with a spell seal. Purple light flowed across the ice wall and released an astonishing glacial chi. Not only was the damage from the silver threads repaired, but the wall condensed another layer of thick purple ice around it, quickly turning it even more difficult to destroy. In addition, the glacial chi turned into purple flames in the blink of an eye and spread across the silver threads towards the embroidered scarf magic treasure. It appeared almost as if thin purple snakes were fiercely pouncing towards it. With an expression changed from shock, the saintess thought, "What is this vicious technique? Despite her surprise, her actions didn't slow in the slightest. She held her hands in an incantation gesture and then gracefully pointed at the embroidered scarf floating in the air. The portrait of the silver silkworm opened its mouth once more and spat out a puff of white flame. It traveled along the silver threads and rushed towards the purple flames to meet their attack. Both of the flames quickly struck each other on the silver threads and the purple-white flames weaved together, and after a short moment, the purple flames massively overtook the white flames and quickly gained ground. When the saintess saw this, she unconsciously frowned and spoke a few words in an ancient language. Suddenly, the soaring sky beast let out a low roar from underneath her and spat a stream of azure flames to merge with the white flames. Joined together, the azure-white flames were able to block the purple ice flames for the time being. In the gap of delay, the saintess waved her hand and summoned an octagonal metal pendant into her grasp before tossing it into the air. The metal pendant then instantly transformed into a huge Bagua diagram, blazing with scarlet flames, and launched itself in Han Li's direction. Han Li curled his lips at the sight of this. Without a change of expression, thunder clapped from his back, summoning a pair of silver wings. As the Bagua diagram was about to strike him, he blurred and disappeared in a flash of silver lightning. With the Bagua diagram missing its mark, Han Li reappeared over 100 meters away with a flap of his wings before disappearing once more. Lightning movement. When the saintess saw Han Li draw closer to her, she muttered the name of this famed technique with a solemn expression. She then grasped her hands in an ancient incantation gesture and had the soaring sky beast spit out a vast sea of white mist before they quickly took cover within it. In the blink of an eye, they completely disappeared into the mist. Another clap of thunder soon rang out and Han Li reappeared at the mist side with an expression of surprise. He wasn't able to find any trace of the saintess within the white mist as it completely blocked his spiritual sense from entering it. However, he didn't have the time to allow the two to continue hiding away. Han Li waved his hand with an icy expression, summoning an ancient purple mirror in front of him. Then, with the mirror held in his hands, he poured the entirety of his spiritual power into it, causing it to pulse with light and release a beam of sparkling purple light through the mist. The beam of purple light caused the white mist to roil before soon scattering it away, soon to leave no further cover for the saintess. But at that moment, an azure flame spat out from a portion of the remaining mist, blocking the purple light from pressing any further. Han Li quickly focused on the source of this flame and faintly saw the lone silhouette of the endless sky beast deep in the mist. However, there was no trace of the saintess standing on top of it. Han Li rejoiced at the sight. He was originally planning of a way to separate the woman from the holy beast, but now that she took the initiative to abandon it, an extremely rare opportunity had appeared before him. Although he didn't know where the endless sky saintess was hidden or what technique she was preparing, he couldn't allow this opportunity to pass him by. With that thought, Han Li sent out a mental command without the slightest hesitation. The huge sword hidden away in the clouds up above suddenly let out a sharp howl and parted away the clouds with a flash of lightning as it chopped down at the endless sky beast with astonishing speed. Ablaze with purple flames and golden lightning, the sword left claps of thunder in its wake. It was only moments before splitting the beast into two. Han Li watched with delight, but soon his expression twisted with disbelief. The soaring sky beast's body turned into rolls of white mist before disappearing from sight. Losing his judgment in his excitement, Han Li wasn't able to see through the beast's illusion and had impulsively taken action. Not good. Han Li shouted out in alarm. No longer attempting to look for the endless sky beast's true body, he quickly withdrew, but a large sparkling azure light shined above him and immediately slowed his movements. At that same moment, he could hear the saintess chanting an incantation. Ha hastily looked up in alarm and saw a ball of silver light. The saintess was floating 100 meters above him and ancient silver patterns appeared on her forehead. As she continued chanting, a small cauldron appeared in her hand. The cauldron then released a large expanse of silver light that enveloped an area of 100 meters around it. The Heaven Void Cauldron. Hanli shouted out its name in alarm and his face completely paled. He hastily looked inside of himself to find the Heaven Void Cauldron safely stored. What was happening? Could there be a second Heaven Void Cauldron in this world? Yet to recover from his bewilderment, the small cauldron above him began to glow with light and surge in size. In the blink of an eye, it grew to 12 meters in size. Then under the command of the Saint's spell seal, the cauldron dazzlingly glowed and released an unending stream of sparkling azure sand. The stream of sand gathered together into a cloud before moving to envelop Hanli. When Hanli saw this, his wings flapped without another thought and silver lightning sparked from his back. But then, faint roars of thunder could be heard from the white mist. The sound wave of the thunder swept past Hanli and caused the silver lightning of his wings to flicker and completely disappear, disabling his lightning movement for the time being. What ability is this? Hanli hastily glanced at the mist in alarm and saw the faint silhouette of the endless sky beast at the edge of it, but he was unable to tell if it was its genuine body. With the cloud of sand only 30 meters above him, Hanli was helpless to escape it. He could only point at the blue light shield and have it wrap around him in a large blue barrier. As soon as the sand and blue light barrier made contact, the azure sand brilliantly shined and massively expanded in size, each grain turning into the size of a boulder as it smashed down on the blue light barrier. A series of booms echoed through the air. No matter how formidable the blue light barrier may be, it wasn't able to withstand such a vast number of powerful strikes. In an instant, it blurred and dimmed. In addition, the cloud of sand split into two and transformed into two flood dragons, wrapping around the light barrier to restrict Hanli. Without another thought, Hanli opened his mouth and spat out a small cauldron. He flicked his finger against it and a blue icy flame appeared on its surface. It was the divine spirit treasure he cultivated to its first layer, the Heaven Void Cauldron. Although he was only able to make use of only a small portion of the cauldron's power, Hanli had no choice but to use it after being pushed to the brink. He swept his hand past the surface of the cauldron and a wave of blue light flew out from it, tightly wrapping around him. Hanli then spread out his arms and flicked his fingers at the two sand flood dragons. A dozen streaks of azure sword chi were released, weaving through the air and fiercely striking the flood dragons. As a result, a dozen thumb-sized holes appeared in the flood dragons' heads but to little effect. Hanli felt his heart grow tense. Just as he thought to avoid the incoming attacks, his body felt as heavy as a mountain and his actions were brought to a standstill, restricting his movements in their entirety. The flood dragons appeared before him and charged into him, collapsing into clouds of sand on impact in two muffled groans. Then with bright light glowing around Hanli's body, the cloud of sands condensed into a giant cocoon around him, soundly sealing him inside. The Saintess had been initially shocked when Hanli brought out a small cauldron similar to her own holy cauldron, but when she saw how easily Hanli had been trapped by the sand, she simply smiled. The might of the holy cauldron sand was immensely powerful. So long as someone was trapped in it, they would be completely disabled and at her mercy. Even late nascent soul cultivators wouldn't be able to escape in a short time. A huge bang sounded out as Hanli's blue light barrier was shattered and another layer of sand immediately wrapped around his body. In that moment, the woman felt at ease and floated down as she stood on top of her huge cauldron. But after descending only 30 meters, a massive change occurred. Countless beams of light suddenly penetrated from within the hardy cocoon from every direction. Before the Saintess could give another command, the sand cocoon collapsed back into a cloud and floated motionlessly in the air. At the center of the sand cloud was a large dazzling blue light. Hanli was inside of it, holding a small cauldron in his hand as he stared at the Saintess. The Saintess came to a sudden stop and looked at Hanli with an unsightly expression, disbelief flooding her mind. A cold snort could be heard from Hanli as he slapped the lid of the heaven-void cauldron. Ripples upon ripples of blue light clearly resonated from the cauldron and soon spread around him, causing the surrounding sand to vanish as soon as the ripples of light passed by them, appearing almost as if the light had consumed it. The saintess was wildly alarmed by the scene and hastily formed a hand incantation, ordering the sand to resume its attack. However, the sand quietly remained in place as if having completely lost connection to the saintess' spiritual sense. Suddenly, the saintess betrayed panic from her face and stamped down on the huge cauldron. It continued to revolve for a time before spouting out a blinding azure light to envelope Hanli, 1. Bagua, also known as the 8 trigrams. It is most often represented as a yin-yang symbol with 8 different trigrams surrounding it in an octagon. The saintess' heart sank and she quickly released her spiritual sense, but Hanli had already escaped the limits of her spiritual sense with his blood shadow evasion. The woman remained floating motionless in place with an ashen complexion. In that same moment, over 500 kilometers away, the elegant man was glancing down at the vast borderless plains with a strange expression as 9 humming dark green wheels fluttered around him. Wood movement techniques. It still had the strength to use the vegetation to conceal itself after I injured it to that degree. And that devil artifact is extremely powerful and troublesome, but it risked backlash when using it. However, it has no hope for survival. It is merely a nascent soul. With the injuries it sustained, its body will soon vanish. Nevertheless, I have the feeling that something bad had occurred. Could it be something to do with the others? The youth's eyes flickered as he muttered to himself before raising his head in another direction. After some hesitation, the 9 wheels joined together as one and he shot back in a dark green streak of light. Under an unremarkable bush, a shining black flag was embedded in the earth. There was a half-foot wide hole that faintly emerged from it where there was an inch-large black-green nascent soul laying inside of it unconscious. Black chi roiled around its body as it quietly absorbed the pure devilish chi in the flag to restore its wounds. In another area of the plains, a beautiful purple-haired woman had used a jade ancient treasure to trap several thousands of gold-devouring beetles. And she blocked an attack from a bead of lightning before easily piercing through the body of the foreign cultivator with a single attack. However, the foreign cultivator's body then glowed with silver light to reveal the body of a charming woman. Then, she completely disappeared in specks of starlight. The purple-haired woman stood in place with shock. 4 hours later, the elegant man, purple-haired woman, and the endless sky saintess met together once more. They gave each other an account of what happened and looked at each other with dismay. The elegant man frowned and sullenly said, "You mean to say that not only did we not acquire the method to nurture the gold-devouring beetles, but we also lost the holy cauldron and the holy beast?" The purple-haired woman wore an unsightly expression and said, "The holy cauldron isn't significant as we have another alternative to summoning the holy beast. However, I fear that having the holy beast's incarnation captured will invoke the fury of the holy beast in the realms above. We must reclaim it." "We were far too careless," the saintess said with an exceptional calm. "I didn't think this person would have a method of restraining the holy cauldron and cause this to happen. I will have to go to the great Jinn to reclaim the holy beast incarnation. And that strange small cauldron that was used to control our holy cauldron is nothing to underestimate either." Tiwen Wang Tiqiang heard this. He was stunned for a moment. The voice sounded very much like the maid named Huang Ying. However, it was quite odd for there to be ice floating in the river during flood season, not to mention the day's warm weather. He couldn't help but take a look above up at the sky and make sure that the sun was blazing in the middle of the sky. He felt on the verge of sweating even as he wore his thin clothes. Could it be there was someone on the ice? Despite the many years spent in the world of Jianghu, this was the first time he had heard of such a thing. He then reached behind him to grab the two short iron short spears he kept on his back before walking over to the source of the commotion with silent steps. When he arrived at the side of the boat, he saw 7 men and women gathered there, consisting of maids, servants, and boatmen. They were all talking and pointing at something in the river. He glanced over and saw something about 15 meters away. There was a sparkling white object floating on the surface of the river. He focused his gaze on it and found that it was a sparkling crystal block of ice containing someone inside. Wang Tiqiang wore an expression of surprise and couldn't help but mutter, "How strange. Could it be that someone had fallen in the river and is now trapped in a block of ice?" He heard footsteps from behind him and a hoarse voice asked, "Brother Wang, what's the matter?" "Brother Gao, you've come." Without turning his head, Wang Tiqiang already knew that the owner of the voice was his partner of many years, Gao Dafeng. He cultivated a body-hardening technique for many years and was somewhat famous for his boxing techniques. The large man with a full beard casually walked to Wang Tiqiang's side and clicked his tongue in wonder. "Oh! There really is someone in the ice. How rare." Wang Tiqiang coldly laughed and said, "It is only a single dead person. No matter how odd the circumstances, there isn't much to say about it." Gao Dafeng stroked his beard and chuckled. "Definitely. At the very least, the corpse hasn't come to rob us." A middle-aged man in Confucian robes walked towards them with a sullen expression and scolded the servants, "What are you making an uproar about? Didn't you know the mistress had just gone to sleep?" This person was Master Zhou, the person who was reportedly the trusted confidant of an important government official. He was currently employing Wang Tiqiang and his partner to guard the said official's family. "Master, in the river." The young maid named Huang Ying shyly extended her finger and pointed in the river. When Master Zhou saw Wang Tiqiang and Gao Dafeng, he felt somewhat baffled. Then when the young maid said something, he unconsciously glanced where she was pointing to find a block of ice with a person inside of it. He wore an odd expression on his face before he frowned and said, "It is only a dead person. There is no point in looking at it any further. Go back to your duties. Could it be that you want me to call over Steward Wang?" The man's final words were spoken with a harsh tone. When the servants heard the name, Steward Wang, their expressions immediately changed and they immediately scattered. The 3 boatmen also made a discreet departure. Wang Tiqiang and Gao Dafeng exchanged a glance and were about to leave as well, feeling that it would be unwise to remain there any longer. But after Gao Dafeng took a few steps, he glanced at the river and shouted out in alarm, "How is this possible? That person is still alive." Wang Tiqiang and Master Zhou were both alarmed when they heard this and they looked at the block of ice to find that it remained completely still. Master Zhou glared at the large man, but Gao Dafeng stood firm and said, "I am not mistaken. I saw the person in the water move his eyes. Brother Gao wouldn't fool us. It seems he is still alive." Wang Tiqiang spoke with complete trust in his partner. Master Zhou still felt a bit of doubt after he heard this, but after some thought, he shook his head and said, "It doesn't concern us if that person is alive or dead. There is no need to attract any trouble to the mistress and her daughter. And since other boats haven't done anything with the ice, there is no need for us to meddle with it either." When Wang Tiqiang heard this, he didn't feel any anger or injustice over the matter. It was odd for there to be someone inside the ice, but that didn't give him any intention of allowing him on the boat. After all, as one who had tread in Jianghu for many years, he found these odd situations to be more difficult to guard against than ordinary people. However, a trace of hesitation had appeared on Gao Dafeng's face. "Master Zhou, please wait." A sweet voice suddenly sounded from across the boat. "The act of saving a life is greater than any mountain. And my mother has a merciful heart as well. Since this person is still alive, can we save him?" Then a young woman in embroidered robes soon approached them, followed by the maid Huang Ying, who was walking with a dropped head. It appears that she was the one who told the young lady about the matter. When Master Zhou saw this woman, he respectfully saluted her and hesitantly said, "Young miss, this isn't very wise. Having a stranger on the boat. What's unwise about it? Since he has survived catastrophe and encountered us, it will be considered a display of our clan's virtue to save him. We even had an empty room on the boat. Could it be with so many of us that we have something to fear from a dying man?" The young woman spoke with a soft voice, but her expression clearly displayed that she wouldn't change her mind. After a moment of thought, he could only agree with a salute. "Very well. Since the young miss had given the command, I will send out men to rescue this person." The young woman responded with a smile and then walked back with her maid in tow. Master Zhou tightly frowned as he glanced in the direction of the ship's hold, and then he wryly smiled, saying, "You heard her. Since this person must be saved and is trapped in a huge chunk of ice, I fear I will have to trouble you two to go make the trip. It's no problem. We have little else to do and have the strength to break this person out," Gao Dafeng said with a casual tone. Wang Tiqiang then examined the huge block of ice and slowly nodded, raising no objections. After spending an unknown amount of time in the darkness, Hanli woke up to a splitting headache. Before he even opened his eyes, he heard a young woman's voice sounding out, "Old scholar, when will this person awaken? It's already been 2 days. Has nothing truly happened to him? The young miss is waiting for my reply." A snort sounded out and an old man's voice sullenly said, "What does a servant like you know? I only have a cursory understanding of the medicinal arts. How can I know when he will awaken? However, this person's disease is truly strange. His complexion is clearly pale and he shows signs of great loss in blood and qi. However, his blood vessels and meridians appear to be far stronger than an ordinary person. This is truly beyond my understanding." The woman chuckled and teasingly said, "It seems the old scholar most likely read the blood vessels wrong." "Nonsense. Have I ever been wrong when I was looking after you all when you were sick? Perhaps this person encountered a strange sickness that hadn't been seen before. Since I am no great doctor, I am baffled by this." The old man seemed embarrassed, but he spoke boldly nonetheless. As Hanli heard this, he realized that he was lying down on a very comfortable bed. There was a smooth blanket on top of him and a thick mattress beneath him. Hanli felt somewhat at ease when he heard the two speaking in the language of the Great Jin. It seems not only had mortals rescued him, but that he was also inside the borders of the Great Jin. However, his current situation was far from good. In the instant he awoke, he used his spiritual sense to look deep into his body. As a result, he felt his blood run cold. After he escaped from the endless sky Sanus pursuit and put thousands of kilometers between them, the Solok seal had gone back into effect. At the time, he had fallen into the river and used the technique for feigning death that Monarch Soul Divergence had taught him, sealing himself in a block of ice and allowing him to escape pursuit from the soaring tribes as he floated down the river current. However, his body's present conditions were as worse as could be. The excessive use of the blood shadow evasion had caused a massive loss of blood essence and immensely weakened his body. Additionally, his severe loss of true essence had caused his cultivation to violently drop to qi condensation stage. Under such circumstances, he would need to properly recover for 5 to 6 years if he had any chance to recovering his original cultivation. Hanli gloomily sighed in his heart and suddenly thought of something before examining the flying swords inside of his body. He then found the primal soul of a greatly weakened and unconscious Silvermoon, much to his relief. However, he felt quite a headache over the fact that his second nascent soul had yet to return. Although he was too far away to know its true location, he was still able to feel an extremely faint connection to it, affirming that his second nascent soul had exceeded his expectations and managed to survive. If he couldn't call back the nascent soul after a certain amount of time, it would not only become independent but it would likely attempt to dominate him. The only good point was once he restored his original cultivation, his second nascent soul wouldn't stand a chance against him. It wouldn't be difficult for him to retrieve it at that point. With that thought, he spoke through his spiritual sense to the bamboo container he was carrying. Senior, how long was I unconscious since I've arrived at the Great Gene? Are there any Great Gene cultivators nearby? Oh. You're finally awake. You've been floating in the river for a year already. Once your magic power ran out, the block of ice began to flow on the surface of the water. But I must say, youngster Han, your current situation is far from good. Monarch Soul Divergence responded with a lazy tone. Hanli smiled and contently said, how could I not know how terrible my body's condition is in? However, my fortunate survival could be said to be a great escape from calamity. There isn't much to complain about. After all, few could have escaped from the hands of several late nascent soul cultivators in that situation. Monarch Soul Divergent snorted and gloomily said, well, aren't you carefree? However, I must ask you why you've never mentioned your divine spirit treasure to me. It was no wonder why you placed me outside your room while you were in seclusion. Of course, I have no objections in letting Senior examine the Heaven Void Cauldron once I recover. Hanli calmly replied. Good. Monarch Soul Divergence said with a relaxed tone, since you've agreed, the matter is done. As for any nearby cultivators, there is only one on board this ship, a girl at the third layer of chi condensation. You don't need to pay her much mind. The third layer of chi condensation. Hanli felt somewhat surprised and then he opened his eyes. Hanli looked to the side of the bed and saw a girl of only 15 years of age. When she saw Hanli open his eyes, she joyfully shouted out, Old scholar, he's awake. The girl was quite adorable with wide bright eyes and fair skin. Yes, I can clearly see. Sitting in a chair at the girl's side sat a gray-robed old man. He appeared around the age of 60 and had a kind face. He was examining Hanli with a calm expression. Old scholar, look after him. I will go and inform the young miss. Before Hanli could say anything, the girl quickly chattered to the old man and quickly ran off. Hanli was stunned by the sight of this, but the old man simply chuckled as he shook his head. He kindly smiled at Hanli and said, I hope you don't take offense at the girl's temperament. Han-Li returned the smile and sat up, slowly saying, I don't dare to. Are you the two who saved me? Where is this place? We're on a boat in the Mystic River. While your life laid uncertain inside the river, my clan's second young miss gave the order to save you. As for me, I am He-Wen, a scholar that the clan's mistress hired. Hanli cupped his fist and said, so it was like that. My surname is Han and I will have to thank this young miss for saving my life. With a smile on his face, the old man curiously asked, our young miss certainly does have a compassionate heart, but it is hard to say whether or not she will see you. Will Mr. Han say how he was sealed inside a block of ice and still lived? I am quite curious. This. Hanli hesitated for a moment before saying, I don't wish to deceive you, sir, but it is inconvenient for me to say. That's fine. Everyone has their own difficulties. The old man waved his hand in a kindly manner and let the matter go. At that moment, the girl rushed back with a spring in her step and said, Scholar, the young miss will have this man rest for the time being. She'll leave the rest for later. The girl then curiously examined Hanli. When Hanli saw this, he smiled at her. As a result, the girl slightly blushed and lowered her head, thinking, this person is a bit unremarkable. He is a bit lesser than the young miss past friends. Why is she treating him with such consideration? Since it's the young miss command, how about Sir Han rest for now? I'll be taking my leave. The old man stood up and then walked out of the room. Han Li naturally uttered another word of thanks before the old man left the room with the girl. Now that Han Li was alone, he looked up to the ceiling for a short while before letting out a sigh. In the following 2 days, no one had disturbed him apart from a maid bringing 3 meals a day. This was to Han Li's satisfaction as it gave him more time to take medicine pills and meditate. As for the girl at the 3rd layer of qi condensation that Monarch's soul divergence had mentioned, Han Li had examined her a bit with his spiritual sense. The girl was beautiful and behaved in a humble manner. She was the 2nd young miss that gave the order to save him. She should have seen through his identity as a cultivator. And from the idle chats of the others on board, Han Li found the general circumstances on the boat. The people on the boat belonged to the clan of a military officer surnamed Xiao of the Liao province. He was rushed to be mobilized in order to replace his predecessor, and his clan slowly followed after him. There were only a few members of his clan, his original wife, 2 concubines, and 3 children. The 2nd young miss was born from the original wife and was said to have a weak and sickly body when she was young. She was fostered by another woman during her childhood and had only recently returned to the clan. The other 2 children were born from the concubines. The eldest daughter was already married away to a suitable clan. As for the son, he was the youngest of the children at 12 years old. The other noteworthy individuals included scholar He, Master Zhou, and an icy-eyed steward Wang who was in charge of the other servants. There were also 2 guards on board, Wang Tiqiang and Gao Dashin. When Han Li paid close attention to these individuals, Han Li felt a strong circulation of true qi from the body of steward Wang, far deeper than the superficial martial arts of the 2 guards. Although Han Li found this somewhat odd, he withdrew his spiritual sense once he figured out the circumstances on the boat and focused his attention on cultivation. 2 days later, the 2nd young miss sent a young maid to invite Han Li over. Of course, Han Li didn't refuse and he was led to one of the larger rooms on the boat. When the 2nd young miss saw Han Li, she sent away the others in the room and smiled at him. Brother Han must also be someone from a Daoist sect. My name is Chao Mingrong, a disciple of the profound Jade sect. Might I know which sect Brother Han is from? The girl spoke with a polite tone. It seemed she concluded that Han Li originated from a Daoist sect since she wasn't able to detect any devilish qi, Buddhist light, or the strict qi of Confucian sections. The profound Jade sect. Han Li frowned. He hadn't heard of this name before, but it didn't come as a surprise. There were innumerable smaller sects in the Great Jin. When Chao Mingrong saw that Han Li was hesitant, she smiled and said, "My sect is merely a small obscure sect in the Liao province. It is natural for you to not know of it. Fellow Daoist Chao is quite modest. I am but an unaffiliated cultivator. I've only recently entered the cultivation world of the Great Jin and I am not familiar with the sects here. I'm afraid I've made a fool of myself." Han Li cupped his fist and assumed an embarrassed appearance. So it turned out Brother Han had recently come back to society. Chao Mingrong sweetly smiled with bright eyes and said, "I've also only left my apprenticeship recently, but my sect is truly a small one. However, Brother Han is so young and possesses a particularly profound cultivation. This is truly worthy of congratulations." "It's nothing much," Han Li casually replied. "I've only managed to reach this stage through luck." When she saw that Han Li didn't go into detail, she wore an understanding smile and dropped the matter. She instead changed the subject, asking, "Why was Brother Han floating in the river inside a block of ice? Could it be that you were attacked?" "That is mostly the case. And I must thank you for saving me." Han Li bitterly laughed, unwilling to go further into detail. With a firm expression, the woman said, "It was only a trivial affair. In truth, I saw that Brother Han would have escaped from the ice sooner or later, with or without my help. However, it is quite startling to the mortals for you to float in the river like that, so I decided to meddle. In addition, it is only natural for unaffiliated cultivators and small sect cultivators to assist one another. When Han Li heard this, he felt somewhat surprised and gave the girl an appraising glance. He then silently nodded his head and said nothing more. Ah yes, how is Brother Han recovering? If fellow Daoist would like, you may stay on the boat for a few more days. I also hope you'd be willing to provide me with some cultivation guidance. Han Li pondered for a moment before answering, I don't have more important matters on hand, so I may as well stay for a few more days. However, providing you guidance will be out of the question, but we can exchange our cultivation experiences. Chow Mingrong was overjoyed to hear this. She had left her apprenticeship earlier because of her limited aptitude. As a result, she hadn't learned any deep magic techniques. Having a superior cultivator such as Han Li to provide some guidance was exactly what she had wanted. After setting up a time for the occasion, Han Li chatted with the girl for a moment before he respectfully took his leave. Once Han Li returned to his room, Monarch's Soul Divergence asked, Youngster Han, why did you agree to remain behind? Don't you wish to find a spirit vein to help restore your magic power? Naturally, I will be looking for a spirit vein, but they will certainly be occupied by the various sects of the Great Gene. Furthermore, there seems to be more cultivators in the Great Gene than I expected. If I rush out at my current cultivation, it will prove dangerous. I don't wish to carelessly walk into death while I don't have the power to protect myself. Oh. So you plan on. I have enough medicine pills on hand and several spirit well objects, Han Li slowly said. A year will be enough for me to recover my foundation establishment cultivation and will still give me plenty of time to find a method to dissolve my baleful qi. As for the girl, she seems quite shrewd, but her cultivation is shallow and she holds no malicious intent. I'll have her make a few things clear about the Great Gene cultivation world before I head on my way. And since I've only just arrived at the Great Gene, I can afford to wait a year. Do as you wish, but I don't have much time left, Monarch's Soul Divergence worriedly said. After a few more years passes, I fear that it will be too late for me. After all, it will take you quite some time to collect the materials for my puppet body. Senior, don't worry. Han Li explained, as I look for the method to dissolve my baleful qi, I will also look for the materials. However, the best method would be to acquire the assistance of a sect. This way, we can cut down on the time needed. Acquire their assistance. This isn't the heavenly south where we can draw on your fame and title. It won't be so easy. The larger sects won't pay attention to you and the smaller sects don't have the capability. After all, the materials that I want are rarely ever seen in this world. The specifics have yet to be determined, so let's take this a step at a time. Perhaps I won't even need to find them and they'll just come knocking on my door, Han Li jokingly replied. Afterwards, he ceased talking to Monarch's Soul Divergence and took out a set of formation flags from his storage pouch. Then, he placed down a simple restriction around him before taking a medicine pill and meditating on the bed. In the Liao province's Wuyuan prefecture, there was a small town in the west known as Sinan. Nearby, there were two slender women dressed in azure Daoist robes that were heading towards a small remote mountain. As their feet shined with white light, they stood on their toes before effortlessly floating a foot off the ground. Then, their gowns lengthened and they gracefully flew through the air at a low altitude. The younger woman of the two appeared to be 18 years old and gloomily spoke to the somewhat older woman at her side, Senior Martial Sister Lu. Will Master truly not assist us? Even if we were to add on Junior Martial Sister Chow, I fear we won't be able to deal with the sharp spirit sect's Wu Xiaoyu. He is at the 8th layer of qi condensation, and it is said that the sharp spirit sect master holds him in high esteem. We are only a pair of 6th and 7th layer cultivators. With our combined strength, we won't stand a chance even if we had help. And if we lose, Junior Marshal Sister Chow will have no choice but to allow Wu Xiaoyu to rescue that heavy criminal, which I fear will bring disaster to her father. There is nothing we can do about it. The older of the two Marshal sisters sighed. Cultivator sects have always left matters of the mortal government alone. And Junior Marshal Sister Chow is only an in-name disciple of our profound Jade sect and was only imparted a few shallow magic techniques by the master. That's why nothing had been said to her. After all, the government holds a few low-grade loose cultivators in order to have them deal with a few matters of the cultivation world. However, Wu Xiaoyu has a deep relationship with the person he wishes to save and knows that Junior Marshal Sister Chow has a relationship with our sect. When he personally came to knock on our door, we couldn't continue to turn a blind eye to this affair. Nevertheless, Master had used her status as an in-name disciple to avoid having to punish her, instead sending off that person to handle it instead. After he left, Master immediately called us over to inform us that this person most likely will be challenging Junior Marshal Sister Chow in order to force her to retreat. Master knows that our relationship with her is quite deep and sent us to warn her. It's clear that she wants us to lend her some strength. Otherwise, she would have simply used a spirit bird to deliver the message instead of us. Although Senior Marshal Sister Yu has a deep cultivation, she doesn't have a strong relationship with Junior Marshal Sister Chow and will not risk offending the Sharp Spirit sect over the matter. And Master has her hands tied since the Sharp Spirit sect has friendly relations with our own sect. As a member of the senior generation, she finds it awkward to interfere. The younger of the two couldn't help but say, I recall that when Junior Marshal Sister Chow's father, Country Officer Chow, was stationed near our temple, he appeared quite strong and was very respectful towards the master. If he is truly implicated because of this matter, it would be a disaster. If that is true, there is nothing that can be done over it. But even if he were to lose a criminal, he would only lose his position as a country officer at most. He won't die. But since Junior Marshal Sister Chow appeared so calm, could it be that she already has a plan? The younger woman smiled and said, there is no need for Senior Marshal Sister to trouble herself over the matter. Everything will be clear once we get to the mountaintop. Junior Marshal Sister is right. The older woman nodded. The two quickly hurried on their way, and after the time it took to finish a meal, they arrived at the mountaintop and yelped with surprise when saw an unexpected straw cottage 300 meters away. In front of the straw cottage, there was a simple stone pavilion with a young man and a girl sitting at a stone table and chatting. When the three girls saw that Han Li and the middle-aged man named Ma Yulin were about to fight, they all unconsciously took a step back and held their breaths. In their point of view, a battle between two high-layer qi condensation cultivators was something rarely ever seen, but to Han Li, dealing with a qi condensation cultivator was hardly worth any interest. He simply stood in place with his hands behind his back as he waited for his opponent to attack. Ma Yulin grew furious upon seeing Han Li's careless attitude and raised the small pitchfork in his hand, muttering an incantation, forming a hand gesture with his free hand. Then after a moment, the small pitchfork trembled several times before releasing a flash of light as it shot towards Han Li in a yellow streak. Han Li's expression remained calm and showed no intention of using a magic tool. Instead, he raised his hand and released a dozen talismans, each of them combusting into a fist-sized fireball as they charged towards the yellow streak. When Ma Yulin saw this, he inwardly sneered. The yellow wind fork was a mid-grade magic tool that his master had personally given him. A few fireballs weren't going to be able to block it. Despite these thoughts, he wasn't willing to meet the attack head-on and potentially damage his magic tool. He promptly formed an incantation gesture and had the yellow streak made a sudden turn and avoid the fireballs in an arc before streaking back to attack Han Li. Han Li smiled and pointed at the fireballs. Suddenly, the fireballs came to a stop and condensed together to form a cloud of flame the size of a wheel. It promptly turned into a 3-meter-long fire snake and shot towards the flying pitchfork, coiling around it and completely restraining it. Ma Yulin was greatly shocked and hastily poured the entirety of his magic power into the magic tool in an attempt to break it free, but as a result, the pitchfork simply glowed with brilliant yellow light and became further tangled with the fire snake. As the struggle continued, the magic tool suddenly dimmed and released a series of hums, a clear omen of its destruction. The middle-aged man saw that things were turning for the worse. Unwilling to have his magic tool destroyed, he quickly shouted out, "Stop! Fellow Daoist's magic power is outstanding. I can see defeat." When Han Li heard this, he smiled and pointed at the fire snake, having it relax its grip before disappearing into embers of flame. Han Li's effortless battle against an opponent of seemingly higher cultivation came as a delightful surprise to the three women in the pavilion. Wu Xiaoyu wore an unsightly expression when he saw this and hesitantly muttered, "Senior Martial Brother Ma, this." "Enough, Junior Martial Brother Wu." Ma Yulin quickly interrupted, "You've clearly seen that I am no match against him even with my yellow wind fork. The life of your nephew has been decided." He retrieved his magic tool and felt relieved after finding that it wasn't damaged. However, he now had a newfound fear towards Han Li's abilities and was unwilling to meddle with him any further. Wu Xiaoyu was brimming with resentment upon hearing this, but if his 10th layer qi condensation senior martial brother didn't prove to be Han Li's match, then he wouldn't either. Afterwards, there was nothing to say and the two sharp spirit sect disciples flew off the mountain with anger in their hearts. As for the other three women, they had gathered around Han Li and were asking him about the magic techniques that he used. He gave them a practiced excuse, explaining a bit about the small tricks he used to control the low-grade magic techniques. Then, the two senior martial sisters sincerely requested Han Li to answer a few questions about their cultivation problems, to which he casually agreed. As time slowly passed by and the day turned to night, the three found it awkward to stay and reluctantly departed. After flying for a few days, the mortals became less frequently sighted and the land became wild and overgrown as though uninhabited. But 2 days later, Han Li arrived at Falcon Cloud Village and descended from his flying magic tool before slowly entering on foot. The village was far more crudely constructed than the other villages he had seen on his way. Not only was it smaller but also only had 4 roads crossing one another. The buildings were also all constructed from yellow mud and scorched wood. He frowned and glanced around him as he walked on the road. As of that moment, the weather was exceptionally chilly, but he simply strode in with his neat Confucian robes. The mortals didn't appear particularly surprised when they saw this. Han Li wore a pensive expression, and just as he felt that something was odd, his expression stirred as a pair of white-robed men approached him, one tall and one short. They were both around the age of 20, but their bodies possessed spiritual qi fluctuations, displaying cultivation at the 8th and 7th layers of qi condensation. When the two saw Han Li, their expressions revealed a trace of alarm and approached him until they were 10 meters away. The tall, skinny youth respectfully saluted him and asked, "Might I know Senior's esteemed name?" Surely he must have come to participate in the Grand Assembly. Han Li was stunned for a moment before speaking with obvious surprise, "The Grand Assembly? I'm not aware of it. I'm only in the area in search of spiritual herbs." "Didn't I say?" The taller white-robed youth said to his shorter companion, "The assembly had started yesterday. If Senior wished to take part in it, he would already be at Snowmound Mountain. It seems he was only passing by." "That doesn't matter." The shorter youth said, "Senior still has the time to enter the Grand Assembly. This assembly is being jointly conducted by the 3 great clans of the Guaning Prefecture. Not only are there many common spiritual herbs on sale, but also many that are several of hundreds of years old, and there is even a 1,000-year-old wild monarch ginseng on sale. The gathering should be about halfway through and the final auctions are about to begin. Surely this will be much better than trying to find herbs on a barren mountain. There are also many loose cultivators and a few small sects trading medicine herbs and materials as well. Our 3 clans doesn't place taxes on any of the revenue. Due to Han Li's many storage pouches at his waist and his foundation establishment cultivation, the 2 white-robed youths didn't dare to slight him. Han Li's eyes flickered and he asked with surprise, the 3 great clans. Could they be the Kong, Zhao, and Dong clans? That's right, the taller youth said with a smile, we are disciples of the Kong clan. We are here to receive any cultivators that were rushing over. Originally, we didn't think that there would be more guests and were thinking of participating in the gathering ourselves, but it turned out Senior just happened to arrive on time. Instead of agreeing, Han Li glanced around and asked, this village is already under the direct supervision of the Kong clan. These mortals seem rather accustomed having cultivators nearby. This is quite rare. The taller youth explained, Senior is quite intelligent. 6 years ago, the village entered the ownership of our 3 clans and was filled with our clan's mortal descendants. As a result, they don't hold much fear towards cultivators like us. So it's like that. This will be troublesome. Han Li muttered, revealing an unsightly expression. The shorter youth's expression stirred and he eagerly asked, what? Does Senior have some other affairs? Could he tell us? Perhaps we can be of assistance. No matter how well it was hidden, it would have been detectable with some careful observation. Could it be this person cultivated a devilish Tao or a wicked heretical technique? If he remembered correctly, the Kong clan hailed from the famous Confucian sect known as the Heavenly Sage sect and the clan still received the sect's backing. Regardless of whether or not this nascent soul cultivator was the Kong clan ancestor, it would be inappropriate for a sect of their standing to either practice this technique or have a guest of this nature. As he pondered this, they descended to the village gates and were immediately welcomed by 4 blue-robed cultivators. At nearly the same time in a secret room over 70 meters deep underground, the lid of a pitch-black coffin suddenly moved and a pure white hand suddenly emerged from the gap. Then it pushed the lid of the coffin completely off to reveal a yellow-robed man wearing a king's crown. He appeared in his 30s and wore an odd expression of bewilderment. What's going on? I suddenly felt a wave of trepidation. Could it be that someone was spying on me? The man muttered to himself. After some hesitation, he carefully released his spiritual sense and swept past the entire mountain, particularly focusing his attention on the many cultivators in the village above. After a long while, he found no trace of any other nascent soul cultivators and tightly knitted his brow. Perhaps it was just an old fart that journeyed nearby and swept his spiritual sense. The black jade coffin should have concealed my corpse chi so it shouldn't attract any attention. The crowned man muttered to himself before returning into the coffin. The lid then slid back in place of its own accord and sealed the coffin, causing silence to fill the room once more. Back on the surface, the blue-robed cultivators recommended Han Li to go to the huge plaza at the center, which was sprawling with 1,000 variously dressed cultivators. However, these cultivators were divided into several groups and each gathered into clearly different areas of the village. There were some that were talking and others that were selling items. The plaza was also covered in variously sized vendor booths with some that have set up tables and others that had their items arranged the ground. It made for quite a lively scene. Han Li smiled and recalled the first time he entered the cultivation world at the Great South Meeting, 1. He felt a bit emotional over the memory. But to his surprise, there was a huge tent that was erected at the center of the plaza. It was sparkling with white light, revealing itself to be a magic tool, and it spanned over 300 meters wide. There were many people walking in and out of its openings. His eyes stirred and he looked at the rest of the plaza. There were stone buildings that were flickering with light with people occasionally flowing through them, but they received far less traffic than the tent at the center. I also have a few things I wish to have explained as well. A hidden room. You have to pay a spirit stone for that. That's quite luxurious. The old man hesitantly said. Hanli mysteriously smiled and said, "That's fine, I will pay the spirit stone. I simply hope that your strange treasure isn't to my disappointment." 1, Chapter 128. The old man Jin Yuan chuckled and said, "Relax, fellow Daoist. I went through quite some danger to obtain it. It is definitely unordinary." Hanli nodded and said nothing else as he led Jin Yuan to a building at the side. After entering the building, they arrived at a huge hall that was over 100 meters wide. It was empty apart from a middle-aged Foundation establishment woman sitting cross-legged on a prayer mat. When she saw Hanli and Jin Yuan enter, she immediately opened her eyes and stood up. "Since fellow Taoists have arrived, it seems you either wish to look at some of the hall's collection of magic techniques or perhaps you require a hidden room to exchange cultivation experiences with one another." "A hidden room is what we want," Hanli calmly said. He didn't have the slightest interest in looking at the records there. After all, techniques that foreign cultivators were allowed to see were likely all ordinary. "That will be 1 spirit stone. In addition, you will lose your room when you leave the hall," the middle-aged woman said with a smile. She then reached for her waist and took out several inch-sized miniature rooms into her hand. Hanli was momentarily stunned when he saw this and casually took out a spirit stone and traded it for a miniature room. He then curiously examined it. When the middle-aged woman saw his curious expression, she keenly asked, "Is this the first time that fellow Daoist saw a hidden fortune room?" "That's right." "Is this a magic tool?" Hanli weighed the item in his hand and felt that it was light as a feather. "The hidden fortune room can be considered both a magic tool and not a magic tool," the woman explained, "but it is very simple to use. You only need to pour in enough spiritual qi to use it. Of course, a low-grade hidden fortune room is only able to expand to a certain degree and doesn't have much other uses. It is difficult to call it a true magic tool. However, higher-grade hidden fortune rooms can have spell formations and restrictions placed within them and could even be considered to be on the level of magic treasures. Of course, the one I gave you is a more common type, but there should be no problem in stopping others from eavesdropping on your conversation." When Hanli heard this, he felt a wave of shock. Although he was told that there would be hidden rooms being rented here, he didn't think they were actually these strange items. Such an item didn't exist in the heavenly south. "Many thanks for the explanation, fellow Daoist." Hanli then walked to the side chamber the woman had pointed out. Jin Yuan closely followed behind him and after a short moment, he couldn't help but say, "It truly came as a surprise that this is the first time fellow Daoists saw a hidden fortune room. But this isn't too much of a shock considering that they are normally only sold to loose cultivators and high-grade cultivators that travel often. Given your young age in current cultivation, it seems you are a meticulously nurtured disciple of a sect and would have had little need for something like this. Furthermore, they are actually quite expensive. The spirit stones would better be used for magic tools and medicines." "Oh. Then what's the price of an ordinary hidden fortune room?" Hanli casually asked. When Jin Yuan saw his interest, he explained what he knew, saying, "A low-grade room would cost a little over 100 spirit stones. And while a high-grade room would have spell formations and restrictions, they cost much more than magic tools of the same grade. With that being said, there's a large variety of hidden fortune rooms ranging from pagodas, pavilions, and courtyards. It is said that the greatest of hidden fortune rooms are small-scale cave residences." "A small-scale cave residence?" When Hanli heard this, he was shocked. When the Jin Yuan heard him, he chuckled and said, "Brother Han, don't jump to conclusions. The simplest hidden fortune room on the scale of a cave residence will cost you several tens of thousands of spirit stones. They aren't something that cultivators like us can dream of. Hanley nodded, his expression returning to normal. At that moment, they had already arrived at the side chamber. There were 6 stone rooms that sparkled with white light scattered around the place. They appeared to be enlarged versions of the miniature stone room Hanley held in his hand. Hanley's heart stirred and he casually probed one of the rooms with his spiritual sense. As expected, there was a restriction that prevented his spiritual sense from contacting it. This was a rather simple restriction and could be easily broken, but the master of the room would immediately detect this and realize that they were being eavesdropped on. This was a rather secure way of preventing others from spying on you. With that thought, Hanley tossed the miniature room into the air and his hand sparkled with azure light. After pouring spiritual power into it, the room grew hot and trembled. Then, in a flash of white light, a muffled bang sounded out, followed by the appearance of a 10-meter-wide stone room. He glanced at the stone room and then politely said, "Brother Gene, please enter. Then I'll be heading in first. But I must say that although I've seen hidden fortune rooms before, I haven't had the opportunity to enter many." Gene Yuan stroked his chin and chuckled before going in. Hanley smiled and followed him inside before swinging the door shut. The room wasn't large but was well decorated. At the center, there was a stone table and stone chairs, and even a stone couch nearby. Gene Yuan had already taken a seat in one of the chairs. Hanley pressed his hand against the wall and activated the restrictions before joining Gene Yuan by taking a seat across from him. With a stiff expression, Gene Yuan spoke first, asking, "I heard you mention before that you had a few things you wanted to be explained. What did you want to know?" "It's not much," Hanley calmly answered, "I just wanted to prepare for a short stay in the Guaning Prefecture. However, I wasn't able to find out much about the local noble clans. From your tone, it seemed that you are a native and would be able to tell me about them." Gene Yuan's expression relaxed and he said, "So it was like that. That will be no problem. I don't mean to boast, but I know much about not only the Guaning Prefecture but the entirety of the Liao province. What would fellow Daoists like to know about it?" With a content tone, Hanley asked, "Since the masters of Guaning Prefecture are the 3 noble clans, how about you give me an introduction on them and tell me any great events that have happened in the past few years? Where should I start on the noble clans of the Guaning Prefecture? This land could be considered to be under the rule of Confucian sects as many noble clans hail from them. But the great 4 clans of this prefecture came from different origins with the exception of the Kong clan." Hanley curled his lips and casually asked, "The 4 great noble clans? Didn't the Guaning Prefecture have 3 great noble clans?" He. It turned into 3 noble clans only recently. 10 years ago, there were still 4. However, the Feng clan had committed an unknown offense against the other 3 clans and as a result, they overthrew them in a single night, exterminating all of the direct disciples. At the time, I heard the Feng clan was discussing something of great importance and had gathered together all of their direct disciples. Gene Yuan then continued with the rest of the story. Hanley sat down and calmly listened to what had happened to the Feng clan. When he compared it to what Feng Yu had told him, there were a few parts that were rather strange. Following that, Gene Yuan began to introduce the various clans in the Guaning Prefecture. He was clearly well-traveled and knew about the many prefectures in the province with great detail. Hanley was satisfied by what he heard and now had some understanding of the cultivation world of the Liao province. This was far more detailed than what Chao Mingrong was able to tell him. Gene Yu spoke in a flurry without stopping, only occasionally pausing to state his own take on the matter. About half an hour later, he eventually said all that he wanted and Hanley smiled, saying, "Thank you for the trouble of telling me all of this, but now let's move on to the topic of your strange treasure. Could you take it out and allow me to broaden my experiences? The treasure. Of course. I still wish for fellow Daoists to help me inspect it. Jin Yuan replied with a satisfied tone. Then under Han Li's gaze, he took out a jade box from his storage pouch and placed it on the table. Han Li swept his gaze past the box and wrapped his spiritual sense around it. Soon, he felt his heart stop. The item in the box released a strange power that repulsed his spiritual sense, in turn greatly captured his interest. Jin Yuan carefully opened the box and revealed a fist-sized ball of dazzling golden light with hazy surface. He pushed the box towards Han Li and eagerly said, "Fellow Daoist, please take a careful look and see if you can recognize it." Han Li raised his brow and brought the box to his eyes before taking a careful look. It appeared like a bubble with a transparent center and a surface that sparkled with golden light. However, it didn't possess the slightest spiritual qi, as though it were an ordinary object. After examining it for a long while, he extended his finger and wrapped it in a layer of azure light. Then he poked the object with it, finding it to be soft and flexible as though it were truly a bubble. Han Li revealed an expression of shock, and after a moment of thought, he attempted to wrap his spiritual sense around it, but it was repelled to the side as the bubble flickered with light. He then unconsciously responded by increasing the intensity of his spiritual sense, attempting to force threads of spiritual sense into it. Suddenly, a strange scene occurred. Golden light repeatedly flickered on the surface of the bubble and it began to expand one moment and contract in another, resembling the beating of a vigorous heart. I even brought a large group of high-grade cultivators with me. But who could have known that the ancient tomb would miraculously disappear when I arrived, only to be replaced by wilderness? Even more unbelievable was that the secret mark I placed at the entrance of the tomb was still clearly present. With that said, Jin Yuan's expression became particularly sullen. Han Li frowned. If this was all true, then Jin Yuan was the sole survivor of the group and he wasn't able to later find the place. Needless to say, his life afterwards can't have been good. After a moment of thought, Han Li calmly said, "Fellow Daoist, could you tell me where the ancient tomb was?" Jin Yuan gritted his teeth and said, "If it was still there, it'd be deep into the snow-mound mountain range." A glint flickered from Han Li's eyes and he slowly asked, "The snow-mound mountain range? If I remember correctly, you stated that cultivators often disappeared in the mountain range. Could this have anything to do with it?" After some hesitation, Jin Yuan answered, "It's possible. If fellow Daoist is interested, I can give you the location of the tomb. Perhaps you can discover something there." Afterwards, he took out a jade slip and imprinted something onto it before handing it over to Han Li. After a moment of silence, Han Li took the jade slip and calmly said, "Good. If I have the time, I'll be sure to take a look." Jin Yuan chuckled with a beaming smile and said, "It seems we've become quick friends and it has been a long time since I've been able to talk about my bitter experiences with someone else. How about this? Since you seem so interested in it, how about I sell it to fellow Daoist? It will only cost you 100 spirit stones. How about it? 100 spirit stones. That is quite cheap, but I can't have Brother Jin suffer a loss. How about I give you 200 spirit stones instead?" Han Li said, wearing an embarrassed smile. Afterwards, he touched the storage pouch at his waist and handed 2 mid-grade spirit stones over to the old man. When Jin Yuan saw the spirit stones, he couldn't help but smile. Then after uttering a polite word of thanks, he took the spirit stones and handed over the jade box containing the golden bubble. Han Li received it and promptly placed it into his storage pouch, completing the transaction, much to Jin Yuan's satisfaction, as if in fear that Han Li would change his mind. But at that moment, a spirit beast pouch at Han Li's waist began to stir and release a strange cry. "This is..." Jin Yuan looked at Han Li's spirit beast pouch in shock. Han Li took a glance at his spirit beast pouch and calmly said, "It's only a few low-grade spirit beasts that I nurtured." They must have thought the box was a treat and were excited. Jin Yuan was doubtful when he heard Han Li's explanation, but he didn't pursue the matter. Instead, he chatted a bit more with him before taking his leave. After Jin Yuan walked out of the room, Han Li's smile slowly faded away to reveal a gloomy expression. Shortly after, he took the jade box out and silently looked at it. Monarch's Soul Divergence calmly asked, "What? Do you plan on truly taking a look at that ancient tomb?" "Of course not," Han Li sneered, "although I don't know if his words were true. I'm not about to brave this danger like some novice. However, I am quite curious about this monarch's tomb. After I restore my cultivation, I might delve to take a look." However, it is clear that he didn't tell me this out of the kindness of his heart. Saying that we've become quick friends, does he believe me to be a child? How could an old man like him easily tell others of this secret matter, let alone a stranger he just met? Given how eager he was, it is certain to be a trap. That's right. But if it were those young fellows that have just left the sect, they will certainly be tricked by such people with ease. He believed that he managed to gain your trust and would have likely betrayed you in the future. Reminds of when I... Monarch's Soul Divergence then sighed and his voice came to a sudden stop. Oh. Was Senior deceived by such a trick in the past? Han Li asked with a chuckle. Monarch's Soul Divergence snorted several times out of embarrassment. I was young once too. It isn't so strange. It's all right. This junior won't ask Senior about his past shames. However, it seems the Weeping Soul Beast is interested in this item. It does seem quite strange. Han Li's face blanked and he slapped the spirit beast pouch at his waist, releasing a streak of black light. It landed on the table and revealed itself to be a miniature foot-tall monkey covered in jet black fur. As soon as the monkey appeared, it began to sniff the air and began to stare at the golden bubble with a hesitant expression. Baffled, Han Li joined his spiritual sense with the Weeping Soul Beast. From its response, it seemed the monkey simultaneously felt somewhat fearful and excited of the golden bubble. What's going on? Before Han Li realized what was happening, black yin qi suddenly covered the Weeping Soul Beast's body and it charged into the golden bubble headfirst. Soon after it entered, the golden bubble brilliantly shined with light and produced a wisp of gray flame that wrapped around the beast's body. The Weeping Soul Beast wore an expression of pain and remained still as it continued to release a pitch-black qi around its body to counter the gray flame. Han Li's brow tightly frowned when he saw this. Although he didn't know what was happening, it appeared that the Weeping Soul Beast wouldn't be emerging from the bubble anytime soon and was drawing on support from the gray flame to cultivate something. But what baffled him the most was how the golden bubble was suddenly overflowing with astonishing spiritual qi fluctuations out of seemingly nowhere with the gray flame's appearance. Monarch's Soul Divergence yelped in surprise and said, wait. I've seen something like this before. Has Senior recalled something? Han Li asked in surprise. Let me think, Monarch's Soul Divergence replied with a solemn voice. It was a very long time ago. When Han Li heard this, he remained silent and turned his gaze to the Weeping Soul Beast in the bubble, pondering about what was happening. A long while later, Monarch's Soul Divergence finally broke his silence with a tone of astonishment. I remember now. When I was journeying around, I saw something similar on a 10,000-year-old corpse monarch that was once a senior monk of a Buddhist sect. After he became a corpse monarch, he refined his crystal relic into an incredibly powerful protective treasure. It would render him invulnerable for a short period of time after it was released from his body. I've suffered quite a bit at the mercy of its might. However, this was something from a long time ago and the protective barrier was silver. Furthermore, This type of treasure should be hidden within the corpse monarch's body. How did a Foundation establishment cultivator like Jin Yuan get his hands on it? You were at its mercy. Since it is so powerful, it could be considered an extremely precious treasure. Han Li then asked with a tone of worry, but leaving aside how it was acquired, do you think it poses any danger to the Weeping Soul Beast? Monarch Soul Divergence muttered, you still haven't realized it. Your spirit beast is currently absorbing the corpse flames contained in the relic. Not only are you an abnormality, but all of your spirit beasts are marvels as well, with this one specialized in restraining ghosts and spirits. In the many years I've been alive, I've never heard of a beast like this. Absorbing the corpse flame. Han Li examined it for a moment and found that the Weeping Soul Beast's Yin Qi was slowly consuming the gray flames, much to his relief. After recalling Monarch Soul Divergence's words, he couldn't help but wryly smile and say, to tell the truth, this beast has greatly deviated from its original cultivation method and had evolved several times already. It's hard to say if it is still a Weeping Soul Beast. Oh. So it's a spirit beast variant. I was wondering why there was the design of a demon ghost on its back. And given the light gray color of the flames, they are certain to be pure corpse flames that are over 10,000 years old. Common cultivators and spirit beasts would perish upon contact, but this beast dares to consume it. TCH, how truly unordinary. However, it appears that the treasure isn't still completely refined and doesn't have a master, or it would have been tracked down by the corpse monarch that created the treasure, no matter the distance. This in itself is quite odd. After a moment of silence, Han Li smiled and said, it still hasn't recognized a master. In that case, after the Weeping Soul Beast is done consuming the corpse flames, I will have acquired a treasure for free. TCH, I didn't think that I'd acquire a precious Buddhist treasure before being able to acquire a Buddhist technique. I truly wish to see the power of the relic's barrier form. Monarch Soul Divergence sighed and explained, I must also mention that this isn't a mere crystal relic but a Vajra relic. A vast majority of crystal relics are white, with a few being other colors. Only golden relics receive the name of a Vajra relic, and there are rarely ever seen. Normally, Buddhist cultivators that refine a Vajra relic are all given the role of a Vajra protector of the sect. It is a position most comparable to the title of enforcement elder in other sections. Han Li's eyes flickered and he asked, then you mean to say that this relic should be even more formidable than the one you encountered in the past? The woman's voice lingered in hesitation before letting out a sigh and saying, several years ago, while your majesty slept, the prince had sent his incarnation to the surface, intending on drawing the power of moonlight in order to refine the treasure. But just as he was about to conduct the master recognition ceremony, a group of mortals suddenly intruded from the outside. Because the prince was absorbing the power of moonlight, a majority of the palace's restrictions remained dormant. As a result, the cultivators went as far as to intruding upon the prince's main room. Helpless, the prince could only temporarily halt the ceremony and activate the corpse puppets to help dispose of the cultivators. However, one of them was rather clever and had seen through the prince's identity as a corpse monarch and immediately pleaded to be placed under any restriction in exchange for his life. The prince saw some potential in taking him in and placed him under the restriction. And what does this have to do with the Vajra relic? The middle-aged man's voice asked impatiently. Please calm yourself, your majesty, the woman hurriedly explained. The point is that the old man gave the prince an idea. The old man said that he would be able to easily collect the primal souls of cultivators from the outside world. There would be no need for us to go through the effort of looking for them ourselves. Oh. Tell me how he would do this. The middle-aged man's voice said with a curious tone. It's quite simple. That person mentioned that the prince should hand over a rare strange treasure over to him and hide a strand of spiritual sense inside of it. Afterwards, he would sell the item to lone vagrant cultivators and lure them to take the initiative to find the prince's tomb. Naturally, this would be leading them to their own demise, but in case they don't go to the tomb, the prince's thread of spiritual sense will find an opportunity to activate the hidden restrictions on the treasure, exterminating the person who is holding it and trapping their soul in the treasure before being brought back to the tomb. However, the treasure must be rarely ever seen, and we would have to completely conceal any trace of the prince's spiritual sense thread or the corpse flame it contains, or else it would be all for nothing. The middle-aged man coldly interrupted, "There is no need to continue. Surely the prince handed over the Vajra relic over to this old man before the treasure was refined to recognize the prince as its master. It is only with the relic's Buddhist nature that the prince was able to conceal the corpse chi." "That's right, it is truly as your majesty thinks. Because once the prince is recognized as its master, the Vajra relic would no longer be able to conceal the corpse chi, and given the large number of cultivators' souls that the prince currently requires, he took the risk and handed it over. However, I intentionally instructed the old man to not provoke any cultivators above core formation stage and risk having others see through the act, and over the past few years, we've had many cultivators delivered to us without mishaps, but now it appears that person has disobeyed, causing the treasure to be seized and the prince's thread of spiritual sense to be destroyed. We'll later activate the restriction on this person's primal soul and properly interrogate him." The middle-aged man coldly snorted and said, "How many cultivators' souls did you acquire in this minor scheme?" "I already have General Gu scheming something. Once he is done, we will have a steady supply of cultivators' souls delivered to us. There will be no further need to lure those cultivators in." "Is that the reason why your majesty brought General Gu outside a few years ago and returned alone?" the woman said with shock. "Yes. General Gu is now impersonating someone, controlling a cultivator clan, and having them work for us. In order to conceal himself, General Gu even manipulated an alliance of clans to exterminate a clan of Buddhist origins. The Buddhist clan elders saw that something was amiss and wanted to inform a nearby Buddhist sect, but I personally exterminated their core formation cultivators. Then, General Gu led the other cultivator clans to massacre the rest of their members." The man's voice sinisterly chuckled with a trace of satisfaction. With a tone of shock, the woman said, "Then your majesty's plan is..." "Hee hee. This isn't anything complicated. You were bound to figure this out sooner or later. This was an idea that the Heaven-Wind Monarch of Fongjin Mountain gave me when he last visited. He had done the same and had yet to be discovered. So long as we are careful, we'll have no worry for cultivators' souls in the next 300 years. Even if things go awry, we can simply move the tomb and make ourselves scarce. Apart from a few old eccentrics in the Great Gene, who could possibly stop me? The Heaven-Wind Monarch. He definitely isn't a simple character. Why would he tell such a secret to your majesty? Could it be he is scheming something?" The woman's voice now held a tone of worry. "A scheme? Of course, he was scheming something." The middle-aged man angrily said, "He took away 3 hard blood pills as payment for what he told me. Even so, I still feel ill at ease over the matter. There is nothing good to be said about Fongjin Mountain's devil pair. Perhaps he wants to lure your majesty away from the tomb. Since our 3 souls are fused together with the tomb, there are few that would be able to defeat us so long as we remain inside it," the woman said with a trace of worry. The middle-aged man's voice paused for a moment and then he solemnly said, "Beloved concubine, your words are reasonable and I'll take action to prevent this. Whenever I leave, I will fully activate the restrictions on the tomb and will be careful when I travel. Neither will I allow the devil pair to know when I leave the tomb. It will be fine so long as you are careful, your majesty." The woman's voice suddenly turned sweet. "In truth, there should be no reason for your majesty to personally take action. You can simply leave the matter over to me or your incarnations. After all, so long as your majesty is safe, I will be glad to encounter any formidable enemy. Hee hee. You might not know this, but for this plan to work, I require all the noble clans of the Guaning prefecture to be under my control, the middle-aged man patiently explained to the woman. When I last left, I had to deal with that eccentric Kong without damaging his body. As such, I was lightly wounded and didn't continue to involve myself. And while the other two noble clans didn't have any nascent soul cultivators, they did come from unordinary backgrounds. They possess several rare treasures that are effective against heretics like ourselves. I reckon that the two clans had been established by their originating sects in an attempt to monitor me. But since I was dormant for over 1,000 years, they had forgotten about me, and I am now able to take care of all of them in one go. When these sects discover me and take action, several years will have already passed and I will have broken through to the next realm with the aid of those cultivators' souls, allowing me to refine a heavenly corpse body. Then I must congratulate your majesty ahead of time. After refining a heavenly corpse body, your majesty will no longer be confined to this tomb. The woman said with a happy tone. The middle-aged man chuckled and said, when the time comes, I will be able to cast a technique to free your soul and the prince's from this tomb. Your majesty, you must also remember we still have to find that Vajra relic, the woman reminded. It is a valuable treasure that will be capable of turning you invulnerable for a short amount of time. Don't forget that old monk when released his crystal relic. It took your majesty 3 days of corpse fire before he could exhaust the relic's golden light and kill the monk within. Now that the relic has been turned into a Vajra barrier, I fear its might will be even greater. Beloved concubine, are you confused? The Vajra barrier is something that only corpse monarchs at the age of 10,000 years are able to refine. It isn't possible for human cultivators. And besides me, the only other 10,000-year-old corpse monarch is the Myriad Demon Valley's primeval corpse Xiong. Human cultivators wouldn't dare to go there. So long as the Myriad Demon flag is present in the valley, I fear that none of the great righteous and devilish sects would dare to go near it. The middle-aged man sneered. That is true. However, that rare treasure is extremely suitable to us. After it is made clear who acquired this treasure, let's send men to reclaim it. The woman gloomily said. Yes, even if you didn't say it, I would have done it regardless. But since that person noticed the prince's thread of spiritual sense in the Vajra barrier, they must be unordinary. Once the whereabouts of the treasure are found, I will send 2 of my incarnations to fetch it. So long as he isn't a mid-nascent soul cultivator, there shouldn't be a problem. I also want to go. The tall silhouette wrapped in black chi suddenly broke his silence. How are you supposed to go out? The middle-aged man's voice turned sullen. He coldly rebuked him. You aren't able to withdraw the corpse chi in your body. Any cultivator will be able to see through your true nature. Speak less rubbish and quickly enter the coffin to cultivate. The large silhouette grew depressed after seeing this and simply waved his furry green arm into the distance before lying down, but his eyes then pierced through the black chi as they glowed crimson as if out of anger. The stone coffin lid then flew back from the ground and sealed the coffin once more. Over 1,000 kilometers away, Hanli couldn't have known that killing that meager thread of spiritual sense would provoke such a large problem. He was currently staring at the weeping soul beast inside of the golden bubble as his expression wavered. And at that same moment as Jin Yuan returned to his own room, his entire body was ablaze in gray flames and instantly blew away into the air as ash. His primal soul remained unharmed inside the flames, but it was clearly struck with terror. Soon, he felt as if he were dragged by something, and his primal soul was wrapped in a ball of gray flames before shooting through the half-open window in his room, only to completely disappear without a trace. After a long while inside the hidden fortune room, Hanli eventually decided to put the weeping soul beast inside his storage pouch while it was still inside the golden bubble. Then, he walked out and shrunk the hidden fortune room back to its original size. After he went back to the main hall, he returned the room to the middle-aged woman before heading out to the plaza. At that moment, it was already afternoon and there were nearly half as many cultivators as before. They were all heading in a peculiar stone building to participate in the auction. Without another thought, he moved to join them. A white-robed cultivator standing at the entrance of the auction saw Hanli and greeted him with a salute. "Fellow Daoist, to prevent too many idle spectators, we are charging 3 spirit stones to participate in the auction." Hanli smiled and silently pressed his hand against his storage pouch before handing over 3 spirit stones to the white-robed cultivator. The cultivator smiled back and gave him a palm-sized jade plate, allowing him to enter. Hanli glanced at the jade plate as he walked through the entrance of the building and saw that it had engraved 243 in silver letters. Aside from that, there was nothing else remarkable. After walking through a 60-meter-long passageway, he came across 4 cultivators guarding a door that shined with white light. When they saw Hanli arrive, they all silently examined him with expressionless faces. Hanli ignored them and walked past them, opening the gate and entering the main hall. He then heard a loud man's voice saying, 500-year-old phoenix tail flower, 790 spirit stones. Is there anyone bidding any higher? No. Then this spirit herb goes to fellow Daoist 130. In a moment, please go to the back and pay the spirit stones for the medicine herb. Hanli clearly saw over 200 people sitting in the hall. Each of them was sitting in front of a table and had placed down their jade plate on top of it, clearly revealing the shining silver numbers on top of it. In front of the stone hall, there was a blue-robed middle-aged man with an imposing appearance. As he was speaking, he was holding open a jade box with a bright purple flower inside of it. The one who purchased this medicine herb was a fat old man. When he saw the middle-aged man verify the winning bid, he stood up with a happy expression and walked over to the side door as if he couldn't wait to acquire it. Hanli looked at the scene with indifference and walked over to a nearby empty seat. He sat down in a chair made of pure white stone. Its jade-like appearance and its warm sensation had aroused a bit of interest from Hanli. This is. Hanli pondered for a moment, recalling the stone materials in his memory only to find that he hadn't seen this material before. His lips faintly curled from his surprise. Fellow Daoist, is this your first time seeing warmstone? He suddenly heard a woman's voice with a faint giggle. Warmstone. He turned his head to the side and saw 2 young female cultivators who resembled each other so strongly they could be sisters. One of them was wearing yellow clothes and the other green clothes, but both of them were indisputably outstanding beauties. The one who spoke was the closer of the 2 and was wearing green. She found it silly how Hanli touched the table. Little sister, don't speak out of turn, the yellow-clothed woman quickly said. Fellow Daoist, please don't take offense. My younger cousin had just come out from the clan and her words are still rash. I hope you'll forgive her. Youngster cousin. They're not sisters by blood. Hanli thought with surprise. But for the 2 to reach foundation establishment stage at such a young age, they clearly had exceptional aptitudes. With that thought, he smiled and casually said, it's all right. I've only heard of warmstone before, but this is the first time I've seen it. Does fellow Daoist know about this item in detail? It can't be a common material or else I would have heard of it before, despite having cultivated in the wilderness all this time. Warmstone is completely different from the material known as warm jade, the yellow-clothed woman explained with a smile. It isn't strange for fellow Daoists to not know of it as it is a material rarely found in other places. It is only present here because it is a specialty of the Snow Mound Mountains. But apart from being warm to the touch and exceptionally white, there is nothing else notable about it. But of course, it is far more valuable than the common jade found in the mortal world. So it was like that. Many thanks for your explanation. Hanli nodded with understanding, and then his expression blanked as he turned to look at the middle-aged man auctioning a top-grade magic tool. His actions had caused the green-clothed woman to narrow her eyes and curl her lips, betraying a trace of disdain. Just as she was about to say something else, her older cousin shot her a stern glance, causing her to keep her mouth shut. Hanli completely ignored this and was calmly looking up at the magic tools and spirit herbs being auctioned. Although the auction was certain to be somewhat lacking considering that it was hosted by local clans, he paid particular attention to it as there was a vast difference in prices between the Great Gene and the Heavenly South. It would serve as preparation for when he would search for rare materials. After some calm observation, he came to the conclusion that regardless of whether they were spiritual herbs or magic tools, they were significantly more expensive than they were in the Heavenly South. The rarer items were particularly costly. After some thought, he came to realize that although the Great Gene was over 10 times larger than the Heavenly South, they attracted a far greater number of cultivators considering their complete legacies of cultivation. This caused a severe lack of magic tools and medicines in comparison to the Heavenly South. Conversely, it could also be said that the Great Gene was abundant with resources and would have many rare materials that would never be seen in the Heavenly South and even the scattered star seas. In this auction alone, there were a few medicines and tool materials that he didn't know of. This was much to Hanli's joy. It appeared that if he paid a visit to the many high-grade market cities in the Great Gene, there was the possibility of acquiring the few rare materials he needed. Just as Hanli thought this, the blue-robed middle-aged man on the stage called out to bring out the next item, a tray with 3 deep red gems on it. They shined with a flicking light similar to a blazing flame. It was rather eye-catching. 3 fire-smelt crystals, the middle-aged man announced with a smile, an ideal material for refining top-grade fire attribute magic tools. Fellow Taoists, the bid will now start at 500 spirit stones. Hanli took a casual glance at them and was about to turn his eyes away, but the crystals then caught his eye and he let out a yelp. Monarch Soul Divergence's voice lazily sounded out from the back of his mind, "Youngster Han, from your reaction, it seems those gems have caught your eye." Gems? It seems there are times that even senior can be mistaken. Hanli sent out the voice transmission with a chuckle and announced a bid for 600 spirit stones. What? There isn't anything particular about these gems. Although my cultivation is gone, my spiritual sense remains. I don't believe I'm mistaken. Monarch Soul Divergence said with a doubtful tone. With a strange voice, Hanli replied, "My experience may still be lacking, but I would dare to say there are few in this world that have more experience in demon beast cores than me." This has something to do with demon cores. Monarch Soul Divergence was stunned from hearing the confidence in Hanli's voice. Were it not for the many years he spent with Hanli, he would have believed Hanli to be confused. After a moment of silence, Monarch Soul Divergence continued, "Since you're certain, there must be some reasoning behind it, but I cannot bring myself to believe that there is something strange about those fire-smelt crystals before I have the evidence. Needless to say, I'm not the only one who didn't see anything strange about the gems, even the auction appraisers couldn't find anything exceptional about them, and they are vastly experienced in dealing with rare items." After hearing Monarch Soul Divergence's words of doubt, Hanli smiled and declared a higher bid, forcing the competing bidders to back down. Happy that the gems were sold for a high price, the middle-aged man glanced at the number on Hanli's jade plate and loudly shouted, 800 spirit stones. The 3 fire-smelt crystals go to fellow Taoist 243. Please head to the back of the hall to pay for the item. When Hanli heard this, he took his jade plate and walked to the side hall. There was a white-robed chi condensation cultivator waiting for him there. When he saw Hanli arrive, he immediately led Hanli to a small waiting room in the rear hall. A short moment later, a servant girl brought him a cup of tea before departing. Hanley glanced at the cup of tea and left it alone as he calmly examined the room. Soon, a bald old Foundation establishment cultivator walked in with a beaming smile. "I am truly ashamed we kept you waiting for so long. Please take a look and see if this is the item you bidded on." After he said this, he handed over a jade box over to Hanley. Hanley promptly opened the jade box and found 3 crystals blazing with red light. With a calm expression, he carefully examined them in his hands and remained silent for a long while. "What? Is there a problem with the fire's melt crystals?" the old man asked with a friendly chuckle. "There's nothing wrong. These were precisely what I bidded on." Hanley nodded and calmly replied. Then, he handed over the spirit stones, took the gems, and took his leave with a salute. As Hanley walked away, the old man took a glance at the empty jade box and frowned, his eyes revealing slight doubt. Soon, Hanley returned to his seat at the auction and in a flash of light, a fire's melt crystal appeared in his hand. Hanley looked at the gem with a smile and obvious satisfaction. The green-clothed woman next to Hanley saw his expression and said, "Fellow Taoist must be quite wealthy to spend 800 spirit stones on 3 fire's melt crystals." After calmly looking at the woman, Hanley replied, "That's right. I've been wanting to buy those crystals for a while. Being able to buy these made this trip quite worth it." When the green-robed woman saw the glint in Hanley's eye, her heart trembled and she suddenly became unable to say anything further. The yellow-robed woman at her side saw this and her expression changed as if she sensed something. She also said nothing. After acquiring this unexpected harvest, Hanley began to look forward to the rest of the auction. But at that moment, Monarch's Soul Divergence couldn't help but ask, "Youngster Han, what do those fire's melt crystals have to do with demon cores? How about you give me an explanation?" "Senior should have already guessed it," Hanley calmly answered. "One of the fire's melt crystals is actually a grade 7 demon core, but after the passage of countless years, its body had turned to that of complete crystal. It now appears no different from a fire's melt crystal. Even those with exceptionally powerful spiritual sense aren't able to see the difference." Grade 7 demon core. Since one can't tell the difference with spiritual sense or its exterior appearance, how were you able to see through it? Monarch's Soul Divergence wasn't particularly shocked, but he still felt somewhat doubtful. This has something to do with the baleful chi on my body," Hanley calmly explained. "In the past, I had personally slain thousands upon thousands of high-grade demon beasts, resulting in the dense baleful chi on my body. As a result, the baleful chi on my body began to stir when the grade 7 demon core was taken out. Since I handled a great number of demon cores in the past, I acquired a particular method of detecting them." "So it was like that," the old man chuckled. "If you truly killed so many demon beasts, then it makes sense to me why you have so much baleful chi on your body. However, I am quite interested in how you were able to kill so many demon beasts. It seems you have many old tales that haven't been revealed to me." "It's nothing. I simply had an opportunity in the past. More importantly, I fear Senior doesn't know the use of a crystallized demon core." Not wanting to mention his years in the scattered star seas, Hanley changed the topic to capture Monarch's Soul Divergence's attention. "Oh. This is also the first time I've heard of a demon core turned to crystal," Monarch's Soul Divergence said with interest. "I do wonder what it can be used for." "The crystallized demon core can no longer be considered a true demon core," Hanley said as he stroked his chin. "If it were used during pill concoction, it will turn into a poison that would kill ordinary cultivators when taken. As a matter of fact, this material is an optimal material for refining flying needles. It is said that when a flying needle is crafted from it, the needle's speed will be so fast it'll immediately strike the enemy as soon as it is released, and most fearsome of all is that a flying needle crafted from this material will be nearly invisible while in flight, allowing it to be an optimal weapon for sneak attacks." However, because it is extremely difficult for crystallized demon cores to be created and there are sparsely few cultivators that can recognize them, so they are seldom ever found. If it weren't for my baleful chi, I wouldn't have detected it myself. As it so happened, Hanli had once read through a jade slip that recorded the refinement method for a flying needle created from a demon core. When he killed Zenith Yin's master in the Scattered Star Seas, he had taken a look at this jade slip out of interest and had only just remembered it after he acquired the crystallized demon core. I've never heard of this before. It seems there are countless bizarre things in the world. I fear there are no cultivators that have tread through all areas of the mortal world. According to what I know, there are at least 6 other cultivation worlds apart from our heavenly south. There are few that can be safely ventured and others that will be dangerous to enter. During my lifetime, I visited 2 other areas apart from the Great Gene. Due to my decreasing lifespan, I returned to the heavenly south and desperately researched techniques to extend my life. Monarch's Soul Divergence's tone turned completely dim and listless. There is no need for Senior to be so dejected. The cycle of death is something all are equally subjected to. Even if you ascended to the spirit realm, you might not necessarily be freed from the shackles of your lifespan and only be entering a world full of immortals. But it is extremely difficult for mortals like us to ascend to the spirit realm. There are only a few people that had managed it since ancient times. Something seemed to stir in Hanli as he said this. Hee. I am still unwilling to give up. I've always believed that I am absolutely among the best in the world with regards to cultivation aptitude and intelligence, but at the very end, my soul became trapped in a puppet body and I only slowed down my death. If another opportunity is given to me, I will surely enter deity transformation stage without too much difficulty. Monarch's Soul Divergence muttered with regret and his voice gradually became softer as he went on. When Hanli heard this, he felt a trace of sadness deep in his heart. In the past, he established a sect in the far west and none in the heavenly south posed to be his match. He was even more illustrious than Hanli and was peerless without a doubt, but he was never able to enter deity transformation stage. This pitiful end of his weighed heavily on Hanli's heart. Monarch's Soul Divergence's current circumstances was a very likely possibility that Hanli could find himself in. With that thought, Hanli's expression turned gloomy and he didn't say anything further. The auction proceeded as usual and the items became even more precious as time went on, but there was nothing that caught Hanli's interest. When the auction was bidding the very last magic treasures and pills, Hanli lost his patience and promptly left the auction, attracting a strange gaze from the 2 women that sat at his side. After he left, he paid no further attention to the other booths and left the plaza, slowly wandering around several buildings absent-mindedly. When he passed by other foreign cultivators and a few disciples of the 3 noble clans, he paid little notice of them either. With slow and steady steps, he gradually made his way to a far more remote area. After the time it took to finish a cup of tea, Hanli stopped and looked to the side. He was now in front of a building with a white-robed Foundation Establishment cultivator standing inside it. The cultivator was looking around as if he were waiting for someone. With an expressionless face, Hanli quickly swept his spiritual sense around him and found that there were no other cultivators nearby, nor were there any powerful restrictions. The nearest cultivators were over 300 meters away and wouldn't pay any attention to this area. As a result, he approached the cultivator standing inside the building. The fierce-looking man was surprised by Hanli's appearance and asked, "Does fellow Daoist have any business here?" When Hanli approached him, he smiled and said, "Are you a Kong clan cultivator?" The large man sized Hanli up and saw that he had a variety of pouches at his waist. Since he didn't seem to be a vagrant cultivator, the large man politely replied, "That's right. I am the Kong clan's chief external affairs attendant. Does fellow Daoist? I have a few matters that I must talk about with your clan master. Do you think you could inform him?" Hanli asked in a friendly tone. "See the clan master. I'm afraid that isn't possible, the large man said with a frown. Our clan master is currently handling important affairs. He cannot casually see a stranger. If it is important, you may as well tell me first. With a deliberate display of hesitation, Hanli then said, very well. Just as I left the auction hall, I discovered that there was an item with a problem. I wish to talk about with your clan master. The auction hall. Something is wrong with your item. The large man's expression suddenly froze and he said, if that's the case, you should bring up the matter with the fellow Taoists at the auction hall. It isn't something that the auction hall can resolve. You'll see once I show you the item. Hanli sighed and then he touched a pouch at his waist. When the large man saw Hanli's action, his many years of experience caused him to unconsciously place his palm at his waist, but when Hanli flipped his hand, he took out a shining red gem and handed it over to the large man. The large man's suspicions disappeared and his body relaxed. With a confused tone, he said, isn't this a fire's melt gem? Why would you need to see the clan master over this? Just as he spoke and reached out to take the gem, a wisp of blue flame suddenly shot out from the stone. At such a short distance, the large man couldn't dodge, and just as he was about to yell, his head froze and a chill ran down his body. In the next moment, his body was sealed in a layer of frost and he couldn't move in the slightest. Hanli swept up a wave of blue light from his sleeve, wrapping up the frozen man in it and bringing him deep into the building. He then entered the building with a blur. Hanli brought the large man to an unremarkable room in the building and laid him on the floor. His body was covered in blue frost, and his eyes were open wide and filled with terror. Hanli summoned a silver needle in between his fingers with a wave of his hand. He then stooped down and quickly stabbed the needle several times into the large man's head. The large man trembled as a result and turned completely lax. Hanli formed a hand incantation and he softly muttered an incantation before striking the man's body with several spell seals. The frost immediately disappeared from the man's body and he sat up with blank eyes and stiffly crossed his legs, then waiting motionlessly like a puppet. With azure light covering his face, Hanli waved his sleeve, releasing several various colored spell flags around him. They surrounded the two, creating a chi-concealing spell formation. After activating the formation, his body blurred and reappeared behind the large man. He raised his hand and pressed it against the top of the large man's head. At that moment, light brightly glowed from Hanli's body and enveloped the large man. What is your name and what is your position in the Kong clan? Hanli's cold and emotionless voice echoed from the light. The large man listlessly replied, I am Kong Do. I am the chief of external affairs. Since when did the Kong clan occupy Falcon Cloud Village? Where did the original residents go? 7 years ago, the original residences were all relocated to a town by the name of Snow River. What is the purpose of the Kong clan's Grand Assembly? That is. After a string of questions, Hanli extracted most of the information he wanted. At the end, he released his grip on the large man and the man immediately fell to the ground. Hanli then took out a medicine pill and forced him to swallow it before striking all the acupoints on the man's body with a silver needle. A while later, Hanli stood up and muttered, with the worry-free needle, his recent memories should be sealed. He won't immediately stir any trouble. It is a pity I can't make use of the Dream Tear technique because of my lacking cultivation and save myself all this trouble. Hanli shook his hand and then withdrew the spell flags before walking out of the building. Afterwards, he directly made his way to the village's exit, having completely lost his interest in further participating in the Grand Assembly. There were quite a few cultivators that were already leaving. As a result, Hanli hadn't attracted any attention from guards at the entrance. In a streak of azure light, Hanli made his way to the small town that the large man had mentioned. The small town wasn't very far away from the Snow Mound Mountains. Soon, he faintly saw Snow River Town over the horizon. Snow River Town was about 4 times larger than Falcon Cloud Village, but it still barely qualified as a town. When Hanley entered, it was already late and the sky was dark, leaving scarcely few people wandering on the streets. As a result, Hanley's arrival hadn't stirred up any attention. As Hanley walked through the streets, he slowly released his spiritual sense, in case there were any nascent soul cultivators hidden nearby. As he expected, there were cultivators in the town, but a majority of them were low-grade cultivators. The highest of these cultivators was a core formation cultivator that was hidden in a courtyard in the southwest corner of the town. As Hanley stealthily swept his spiritual sense through the town, none of the cultivators detected him in the slightest. After confirming that there were no threats to him present in the town, he concealed his aura and walked down the street, occasionally sweeping his eyes to either side as if he were looking for something. Soon, he arrived at a wide intersection, what seemed to be the center of the town. Hanley glanced at the sign for an inn and narrowed his eyes before coming to a stop. The signboard was a meter long and was written with the silver words, "Pleasant Arrival." It was a common name for inns in the Great Gene. There were surely several hundreds at the very least, if not thousands. Hanley was staring at the teapot mark at the corner of the sign in particular, and his eyes wandered. After examining it for a short moment, he took a deep breath and looked up at the small inn. Seeing that there was no one around, his figure blurred, and in a flicker of faint yellow light, he phased through the inn's door as if it weren't there. The main hall of the inn was pitch black and completely quiet. It was unknown if there were any guests or if they were all sleeping. After some consideration, Hanley closed his eyes and released his spiritual sense, immersing his mind with the image of the inn. He then silently turned into a gust of wind and disappeared into the darkness. The owner of the Pleasant Arrival Inn was a shriveled old man in his 50s and was among the wealthiest people in the village. After a busy day, he had drawn himself into deep slumber, embracing a young concubine that he had married earlier in the year. But suddenly, he felt an icy bone-chilling wind blow past him, rousing him wide awake. He suddenly opened his eyes and broke out into a cold sweat. In the pitch blackness, there was someone standing at his bedside, staring at him with cold shiny eyes. "You!" Just as he was about to yell, a silver line flashed and his throat turned numb, his voice coming to an immediate stop. "Don't be loud. Although there are no cultivators in the inn, I don't wish to alarm anyone. I only want to speak to you about this item." The silhouette raised his hand and a key shining with silver light appeared in front of the old man. When the old man saw this key, his body trembled and his body relaxed. Instead, a trace of delight appeared on his face. The person holding the key was Hanley, of course. The old man hastily jumped up from the bed and gestured with his hands, attempting to speak, but no sound came out from his mouth. Hanley smiled and raised his hand, taking out a silver needle from the man's throat. The old man coughed several times and eventually regained his voice, then asking, "Could you allow me to examine the silver key?" After a moment's pause, Hanley handed it over. The old man took the silver key and examined it for a long while before handing it back to Hanley with both his hands. With a respectful expression, he deeply bowed to Hanley and said, "Are you the great young master?" "You already saw the key," Hanley said. "Is there a problem?" "None. Since the young master sought me out and he has the genuine key, your identity is certain, but..." The old man then turned his gaze to the young woman sleeping behind him. Hanley blinked and calmly said, "Don't worry, I already put her under a spell before I woke you up. No matter how loudly you shout, she will hear none of it." "That is good," the old man sincerely said. "The clan master hasn't contacted me after several years. I am only a mortal, so I didn't know what was happening. I didn't dare to make any inquiries, fearing that I would attract the attention of other cultivators. Now that the young master has brought the silver key, I can finally relax. Were it not for the clan head mentioning that you had changed your appearance, I wouldn't have dared to believe it. Something had truly happened to the Phone clan. As such, I will need to open the secret reserves and take a few items out. Apart from the clan head, none knows of its location. He should have left behind a backup map with you. Give it to me. Han Li spoke bluntly and with a commanding tone. Yes. Since you have the key to the reserve, you have the qualifications to open it. Just a moment, young master. The old man then covered himself in several articles of clothing and led Han Li to the inn's rear courtyard. As a result, the old man grabbed an iron hoe and began to dig at an unremarkable corner of the courtyard. Afterwards, he used his hands to carefully search the soil, eventually finding a stone brick with a common appearance. At that point, he was already covered in sweat. The old man handed over the brick to Han Li and said, "The location of the secret reserve is sealed in here. There is a restriction on it and I am incapable of opening it, but young master should be able to." "Of course I do." Han Li gave the brick a few appraising glances and nodded with satisfaction. Then with a stern expression, he commanded, "Now that I have this item, you shouldn't stay here any longer. Travel far away and hide your identity." The old man's expression turned dim when he heard this. Then something must have truly happened to the Phone clan. "Don't worry, young master, I will immediately depart in a few days. I won't have the information of young master leak out." Han Li put away the stone brick and took another glance at the old man's dim expression. With a moved heart, he flipped his hand and gave a small azure bottle to the old man. "You should know how things stand now. Since you've always remained loyal to the Phone clan, take this bottle of medicine pills. Although you are only a mortal, the pills will strengthen your body and allow you to live a longer life." The old man was stunned for a moment before happily replying, "Many thanks for your generosity, young master." Han Li waved his hand and expressionlessly said, "All right, I'll be leaving now. Take care of yourself." Then in an azure flash, he disappeared from the inn without a trace. The old man glanced around him in shock and after a long while, he confirmed that Han Li had left. Then, he lowered his head and blankly looked at the medicine bottle before letting out a sigh. When Han Li left the inn, he immediately flew out of the town and went to find a desolate mountain. After dropping down, he summoned an azure brick with a flip of his palm. With the brick in hand, Han Li took a closer look at it and swept his other hand past it. With fingertips glowing in azure light, they brushed past the brick's surface and caused it to ripple in white light. He curled his lips into a smile and nodded. The brick was consistent with what Feng Yu told him. It was actually a storage pouch in disguise, but it needed to be opened with a specific incantation. If it were opened by force, the items it contained would be turned into ash. Han Li acquired the incantation from Feng Yu before his death and now uttered it, spitting out a ball of azure light with talisman characters roaming across it. It struck the brick and enveloped it within. Soon, he formed an incantation gesture with a single hand and quickly pressed against each corner of the brick with his finger. With a light bang, a pitch-black hole appeared on its surface. He didn't take the risk of sticking his hand into it. Instead, he slapped the bottom of the brick and it trembled with light, causing 2 items to fly out from the hole. There was a jade slip that was several inches large and a pile of tightly bundled documents. He easily caught them in the air with a single hand. After putting away the brick, Han Li paid no attention to the documents and immediately immersed his spiritual sense into the jade slip. Not long after, his expression warped and turned sullen. Monarch Soul Divergence saw his reaction and asked, "What is it? Could it be it doesn't contain the location of the Phone clan's secret cave?" "It's there, and it even details its exact location." After letting out a long sigh, Han Li withdrew his spiritual sense from the jade slip and frowned. Then why are you so gloomy? Could it be the cave is in a dangerous place? As expected of an eccentric nearing the age of 10,000 years, Monarch's sole divergence guessed correctly. Hamlet sighed and wore a helpless expression, saying, "It is possible I'll run into trouble. The secret cave is located deep into the Snowmound Mountains. Why did the Foam clan establish it there? Could it be they didn't know there was something strange about the mountains and that cultivators often disappeared?" Monarch's sole divergence spoke with a flabbergasted tone. "Who knows?" Hamlet said with a wry smile. Perhaps the Foam clan ancestor felt that the more dangerous the area, the safer it would be. Monarch's sole divergence lazily said, since they had always used this secret cave, it shouldn't be too dangerous. There's no point in being too worried. I hope so. Now that I've acquired the map, I can't let this go by because of some unknown danger. If this goes smoothly, I'll arrive there in a day. Afterwards, Hamlet put away the jade slip and then picked up one of the documents, flipping through it before yelping in surprise. He then said, "These are the deeds for the Foam clan properties in the mortal world. They can be said to own the most land in the region. Is this anything strange?" Monarch's sole divergence asked. The noble clans of the Great Gene and the immortal clans of the Heavenly South have quite a few differences. Interfering with the mortal world can be considered quite ordinary, and it isn't a disgrace to interact with high-ranking government officials and the wealthy. Even vagrant cultivators take the initiative to reach out to them for help. Not only does the Great Gene span across a great amount of land, but the mortals living there exist in far greater density than the Heavenly South. As a result, there are fewer desolate areas, and spirit medicines and spirit stones often found themselves in the hands of mortals. This is different in the Heavenly South, where mortals occupy far less land and there is much more wilderness. As such, the Heavenly South cultivators don't interact much with them.